Hey friends, glad you're here at Bald Voldemort. We've cooked up something special. What if Harry Potter was bastard son of Wonder Women? Liking and subscribing really helps us out. Okay, story time. Chapter 1. The boy who bent the bars the cupboard under the stairs at number 4. Privet Drive had exactly 11 inches of headroom for a boy who was, by any reasonable measure, too big for it. Harry Potter had known this for at least 2 years, ever since his knees had started scraping the underside of the 3rd stair. Whenever he turned over in his sleep, he'd mentioned it to Aunt Petunia exactly once, and the answer had been a flat look and the suggestion that he could always sleep in the garden if the cupboard didn't suit him. He hadn't mentioned it again. What he also hadn't mentioned to anyone ever, because there was no one to mention it to, and because some instinct buried so deep in him it might as well have been marrow told him not to, was that the cupboard door had a problem. Not with the hinges, with the latch. Aunt Petunia had put a new bolt on it after the incident with Dudley's second bicycle. A good solid one, brass, the kind you'd find on a garden shed. And 3 separate times in the last year, Harry had woken up furious about something, usually Dudley, usually a nightmare about a flash of green light he never remembered when he woke up, and found the bolt hanging open in 2 pieces on the floor, sheared clean through like someone had taken garden shears to a licorice stick. He always closed the cupboard door quietly after that and never said a word. Uncle Vernon replaced the bolt each time with a grim, put-upon sigh about the cost of hardware these days, and never once asked how his 10-year-old nephew, locked in from the outside, had broken his way out. It was the 3rd of July, 2 days before Harry's 11th birthday, when Dudley Dursley and his gang cornered him behind the school bins with a cricket ball. "Go on then, freak," said Piers Polkiss, who had a face like a rat wearing another rat's face as a disguise. "Catch it." Dudley wound up like he was bowling for England, which is to say badly, and threw the ball at Harry's head from 4 feet away with everything his substantial arm could manage. Harry didn't duck. He'd meant to. Every instinct told him to flinch, to throw his hands up, to do the thing that 10 years of practice had taught his body to do whenever a Dursley or a Dursley's friend aimed something at him. But something else, something quieter, older, that lived somewhere behind his ribs and had never once been wrong, told him with total and absolute certainty that it would be fine. The ball hit him square in the forehead with a sound like a knuckle rapping on a melon and bounced off and rolled away into the gravel. Nobody moved for a second. Harry didn't even blink. "Did that not hurt?" said Dennis Bishop, one of the smaller boys, in a voice that had gone very high. Harry considered lying. He considered a lot of things in that half-second, running, laughing it off, pretending he'd been about to fall over and simply hadn't gotten around to it yet. What he actually did, because he was 10 and tired and it was very hot out and he had simply had enough of the whole business, was reach up, rub the spot on his forehead where there was, he checked, running 2 fingers over it, not even a mark, and say, "Number not really." "He's lying," said Dudley, though his voice had gone smaller. "Throw it again if you don't believe me," Harry said. Nobody did. They left in a clump, muttering, throwing looks back over their shoulders, and Harry stood behind the bins by himself, picking up the cricket ball and turning it over in his hands, feeling, for the first time in a very long while, something other than the low, familiar hum of dread he usually felt after Dudley's gang found him. He felt fine. He felt, if he was honest with himself, a little bit disappointed that they hadn't tried harder. He didn't tell anyone about that either. There was, again, no one to tell. The zoo trip happened 3 days later, for Dudley's birthday rather than Harry's. Nobody threw Harry a birthday party, ever, a fact he'd stopped being upset about around age 7. But Mrs. Figg had broken her leg tripping over one of her cats, so for lack of anywhere else to dump him, Harry got taken along. He liked the reptile house. It was dark and cool and quiet, and nobody there cared that his glasses were held together with tape, or that his clothes were 4 sizes too big, because the animals didn't care about anything except being animals, which Harry found restful. There was a boa constrictor in a glass case near the back that Dudley banged on with both fists until a zookeeper told him to stop, and the snake, enormous, the color of wet sand, didn't so much as twitch. Harry drifted over after Dudley had wandered off to bully the vending machine, and crouched down in front of the glass, and found the snake looking directly at him with flat golden eyes. "Bit embarrassing, that," said a voice very clearly from somewhere that was not Harry's own head and yet somehow was. Harry looked around. There was nobody else near the tank. "Was that you?" he asked, feeling extremely foolish. "Who else? The fat one's given up, has he? Small mercies." "You can talk," Harry said, which was possibly the single stupidest sentence he had said in his life, and he knew it as it left his mouth. "I have always been able to talk," the snake said, with what Harry could only describe as amusement. "It is rare that anyone can be bothered to listen. You've a strange smell to you, boy, not quite man, something older underneath." "I don't know what that means," said Harry honestly. "No," agreed the snake. "I don't suppose you do. Not yet." And then Dudley came barreling back, shoved Harry clean off his feet to get a better look, and the glass, Harry would swear on anything asked of him that he never touched it, that he was already 3 feet away on the floor when it happened, simply wasn't there anymore. It didn't shatter. It didn't crack. It was simply, silently, gone, as if it had decided all on its own that it no longer wished to be glass, and the boa constrictor slid out over the lip of the enclosure, with the unhurried confidence of something that had never once in its life needed to be afraid. "Brazil, here I come," it said to Harry as it passed, almost fondly. "You should learn what you are, boy, before somebody else decides it for you." Chaos followed. Dudley somehow ended up trapped inside the very glass case he'd been terrorizing, sealed in as neatly as if a door had swung shut and locked, because, in fact, that was precisely what had happened, though nobody could explain how, least of all Harry, who had only thought in the white-hot half-second between Dudley shoving him and the snake escaping, "I wish you'd get stuck in there yourself, you great pig," and Aunt Petunia's screaming filled the whole building. In the car afterward, nobody spoke to Harry. Nobody needed to. Uncle Vernon's silence had texture to it, a thick, purple, seething quality, and when they got home he was sent to his cupboard without dinner for what Uncle Vernon called, "However long it takes for me to work out how you did that." Harry lay in the dark that night with the cricket ball bruise that never bruised and the memory of a snake's voice in his head, and thought, not for the first time, there is something wrong with me, or something wrong with everyone else. I genuinely can't tell which. He did not think, even once, to be afraid of himself. That was, perhaps, the strangest part of all, that whatever lived in him understood no fear of its own nature, only a persistent, patient confusion about why the rest of the world flinched from it. Far away, further than Harry could have conceived of, in distance and in every other way that mattered, in a house of black marble built into a cliff face on an island that did not appear on any map humans had ever drawn, a woman who was not entirely human sat very still at a loom that had not moved in over 2,000 years, and felt something shift in the weave of the world. She was beautiful in the way that old marble statues are beautiful, not soft, not warm, carved to a purpose. Her hair was dark and her eyes were the pale, restless green of sea glass, and she had been called many names across many centuries. Kirk, in the tongue that first named her Circe, in the tongue that turned her into a warning told to children. She preferred, privately, neither. She preferred, if pressed, simply Queen, because that was the one truth about her that no one, not the Amazons, not the gods, not the thin, cowardly wizards who now scuttled around in the shadow of magic they didn't understand, had ever managed to take from her. She had felt the same disturbance 11 years ago, On a night in October, a ripple in the deep magic of the world so violent it had knocked 3 of her scrying mirrors from their stands. She had assumed at the time that it was merely the death of a minor dark wizard whose ambitions had briefly grown larger than his competence, an unremarkable thing, the kind of noise the mortal world made every few decades and then forgot. She had not thought of it again in 10 years. But now, in a suburban house behind a hedge in a country she'd long since stopped bothering to hate specifically, a small boy had unmade a pane of glass with a thought and hadn't even noticed he'd done it. And the ripple that sent through the fabric of magic had her exact same signature. The signature of divinity, filtered through mortal blood, filtered through witch blood, in a combination that should not have been survivable, let alone stable. Circe rose from the loom. On the wall behind her, a mirror the size of a door showed nothing but static gray, until she touched 2 fingers to the frame, and the static resolved into a boy's face, thin, dark-haired, glasses taped at the bridge, glaring resentfully at a cupboard door from the inside. "Oh," she said softly to the empty room in a voice with real delight in it, the first genuine delight she had felt in longer than she cared to admit. "Oh, you didn't." She had spent 2,000 years hating an island of women who believed themselves without flaw, who had exiled her from the company of gods for daring to want power on her own terms, rather than borrowed from a man's hand or a king's throne. She had spent 2,000 years watching Diana of Themyscira in particular, the newest jewel of Olympus, the perfect Amazon, beloved even by the gods who'd cast Circe out, and finding no crack in the woman's armor worth exploiting. Here, at last, was a crack the size of a country house in Surrey. "Little Demigod," she murmured, watching the boy on the other side of the glass press his palm flat against the cupboard door, watching, with the eye of someone who had studied bloodlines and prophecy for longer than most civilizations had existed, the door bow very slightly outward under a pressure the boy himself didn't seem to register he was applying. "Let's see what your mother left rotting in a cupboard, shall we? Let's see how perfect Themyscira looks once the world finds out what she abandoned." She did not go to him yet. There was no need to rush a thing this delicious. Patience, Circe had learned across 2 millennia, was the only weapon that never dulled. The letters started arriving on Harry's 11th birthday, which nobody in the house had remembered except Harry himself. Silently, over a bowl of cereal he'd made for himself because nobody else had thought to. The first letter came addressed, impossibly, to Mr. H. Potter, the cupboard under the stairs, 4 Privet Drive, which meant whoever had sent it either knew things about this house that Harry himself had never told a living soul, or had been watching closely enough to know exactly where he slept. Uncle Vernon snatched it out of his hands before he'd gotten the flap more than half open, went the color of old porridge, and burned it in the kitchen sink. "There's more coming," Harry said. He didn't know how he knew. He just did, the same bone-deep certainty that had told him the cricket ball wouldn't hurt. "There is not," said Uncle Vernon, with the particular over-loud confidence of a man who is extremely wrong and knows it. There was more coming. Rather a lot more, as it turned out. By the 4th day the letters were arriving in the dozens, jammed through the letterbox, wedged under the door, disguised inside eggs delivered by the milkman in a scene that had Uncle Vernon shouting so hard his mustache trembled. By the end of the first week they were fleeing the house entirely. A miserable bouncing drive with Aunt Petunia clutching Dudley and Uncle Vernon muttering about showing them all. First to a motel that got 30-odd letters wedged under its door by morning. Then finally, in a fit of what Harry privately considered magnificent, unhinged desperation, to a freezing, half-collapsed shack on a rock in the middle of the sea. Harry didn't mind the shack particularly. It had 1 bed, which Dudley claimed by sheer bulk, leaving Harry to curl up on the floor under a moldy blanket that smelled of fish. Outside, the storm hurled itself against the walls like it had a personal grudge, and Harry lay listening to it and thinking, with the strange calm that had settled over him more and more as the letters kept coming. Someone out there wants to find me badly enough to chase me to a rock in the sea. That has to mean something. He checked his watch, Dudley's old one, cracked face, 10 minutes fast, as it ticked past midnight into the 31st of July. He was 11. Officially now, for the whole world and not just himself. The knock came almost exactly on the stroke of midnight, 3 great booming raps that didn't sound like knuckles on wood so much as a battering ram deciding to be polite about it. Uncle Vernon came thundering down from the loft where he'd rigged himself a rifle, an actual rifle, which Harry hadn't known the family owned and found deeply, darkly funny given how the man usually fainted at the sight of a spider, and leveled it at the door with hands that shook too badly to aim it at anything. "Whoever's there," Vernon bellowed, "I warn you I am armed." The door came off its hinges. It didn't crash open. It didn't get kicked in. It came off cleanly, both hinges and the deadbolt shearing simultaneously, and fell flat into the room with a sound like a felled tree. And standing in the doorway with the storm howling around her like it was announcing her arrival personally, was a woman Harry had never seen before in his life, and somehow, in the same instant, recognized completely. She was tall, taller than Uncle Vernon, taller than most men Harry had ever seen, and she stood in the wrecked doorway wearing what looked absurdly like armor. Dark leather and burnished bronze at the shoulders, a skirt of layered leather strips, bracers on both forearms that caught the one working light bulb and threw it back like mirrors. Black hair whipped loose around a face that belonged, Harry thought with the strange detached clarity of someone in shock, on a coin or a statue rather than a person, strong-jawed, dark-browed, and right now furious in a way that made the whole shack feel smaller. "Get out of my way," she said to Uncle Vernon in a voice that didn't shout and didn't need to. Vernon, to his very limited credit, did not immediately get out of her way. He fired the rifle. Harry would remember the next half-second for the rest of his life. The muzzle flash, the recoil that nearly took Vernon off his feet, the bullet crossing 4 feet of space toward the woman's chest, and the flat, ringing clang of metal on metal as she caught it, without appearing to move faster than a person simply lifting a hand, on the bracer strapped to her left forearm. It hit and stopped and dropped, spent, to the floorboards, smoking very slightly, and rolled to a stop against Dudley's foot. Dudley looked down at it and made a sound Harry had never heard a human being make before. The woman looked at the bullet on the floor, looked at Vernon, who had gone the color of candle wax, and was staring at the rifle in his hands as though it had personally betrayed him. And then, with the unhurried, contemptuous ease of someone stepping over a puddle, she walked past him into the room, and her eyes, Harry saw now they were the same shade of gray-green as storm water, found his in the dark and stopped. Nobody said anything for a long moment. The storm kept howling outside. Petunia had backed herself and Dudley into the corner by the cold fireplace and was making a thin, high whimpering noise. "Harry," the woman said, not a question. She said it the way you might say a word you'd been rehearsing in your head for a very long time, and were only now, finally, allowed to speak aloud. "That's me," Harry said, because it seemed important to say something, and because 11 years of privet drive had at least taught him that silence in front of a furious adult rarely ended well, even when, as now, every instinct in him said this woman's fury wasn't aimed at him at all. She crossed the room in 3 strides and crouched down in front of him. She had to be at his eye level even crouching, which told him something about just how tall she really was, and looked at him with an intensity that would have frightened him from anyone else. From her, it didn't. He couldn't have explained why. It simply didn't. "You're small," she said, and there was something raw underneath the flat observation, something that cracked halfway through the sentence. You should not be this small. You should not be. She stopped herself, jaw tightening, and looked briefly murderous, not at him. He understood immediately, at something else entirely, something behind her, something years in the past. How old were you when they put you in a cupboard? Harry blinked. How did you know about the cupboard? Answer the question. I don't remember not being in it, Harry admitted. Since I was really small, I think, 4, maybe younger. Something happened in the woman's face. It wasn't tears. Harry got the impression, even then, that this was not a woman who cried easily or often, but it was close to it. A controlled, terrible stillness. And when she turned her head to look at Vernon and Petunia crushed into the corner behind her, the temperature of the room seemed to actually drop. 7 years, she said, very quietly, to Petunia specifically. 7 years I trusted your sister's judgment that you would raise him decently, out of respect for something owed between our families that has nothing to do with you. And you put a child, my child, in a cupboard. Petunia's voice came out strangled. Your child. Lily's boy is not, you can't be. Lily never said. Lily, said the woman, and her voice cracked properly this time, just for a fraction of a second. Never told me either until it was already done, and then she never told me again because I was needed elsewhere and could not be reached, and by the time I could be reached, she stopped. Straightened up, still crouched, hands on her knees, looking at Harry instead of finishing that sentence. My name is Diana, she said. I should have come for you the day you were born. I am sorrier than you can understand right now that I did not. That is going to change tonight. And it is never, ever going to be a question again. Do you understand me? Harry did not, in fact, understand any of it, not really, not the shape of it, not what she meant by my child in a way that so plainly wasn't a metaphor, not why Aunt Petunia's face had gone the color of ash at the word Lily. What he understood, with the same wordless certainty that had told him the cricket ball wouldn't hurt, was that this woman was not lying, and that whatever came next, he was done sleeping in a cupboard. Are you my mum? He asked. It came out smaller than he meant it to. No, Diana said, and it was gentle, which somehow made it worse and better at the same time. Lily was your mother. Lily loved you and died protecting you, and nothing that happens tonight changes that or takes it from her. But I am. She exhaled, and for a woman who'd just torn a door off its hinges and caught a bullet with her bare arm, she looked in that moment almost lost for words, which struck Harry as the strangest thing that had happened all night, stranger even than the door. I carried you before Lily did. There is no simple word for what that makes me to you. Perhaps we find one together. Behind her, Uncle Vernon had recovered enough of his nerve to attempt outrage. Now see here, he began. Whatever this freakish nonsense is that you people are involved in, the boy is our responsibility legally, and I will not have some circus performer in fancy dress bursting in here in the middle of the night and Diana didn't even turn around. She simply raised one hand, palm out, in Vernon's direction, not touching him, not close to touching him. And the rifle he'd set down on the table beside him folded in on itself like wet paper, barrel curling into a loop, stock splitting along the grain, and dropped to the table in a shape that no longer resembled a weapon in any way at all. The silence after that was total. You will not, Diana said, still without turning around, raise your voice in this room again. Vernon did not raise his voice again. Petunia, however, found hers thin and shaking, but hers. You don't understand what he is, she said. You don't know what he can, the things that have happened in this house, things he's done without meaning to, things that terrify. I know exactly what he is, Diana said, and now she did turn, slow and deliberate, to face her. He is my son. He is 11 years old, and he was raised in a cupboard by people who were terrified of him, which means that for 11 years, nobody who was supposed to love him unconditionally ever told him it was safe to be strong. Do you have any idea? And her voice, for the first time, actually rose, filling the little shack, competing with the storm and winning. What it does to a child to grow up believing his own nature is something shameful. I have watched armies break under less cruelty than that. We didn't ask for this, Petunia burst out. We didn't ask to be saddled with whatever he is. We never wanted any of this, magic monsters, gods, whatever you people call yourselves. We just wanted to be normal. Then you should not have agreed to raise a child you had no intention of loving, Diana said, flat and final, and something in the plain, unornamented cruelty of it, no shouting, no threat, just the truth stated as fact, seemed to hit Petunia harder than the destroyed rifle had. Harry sat very still through all of this, aware, distantly, that this was probably the single strangest night of his life, and that it was very likely going to get stranger. He watched his aunt's mouth work soundlessly. He watched Uncle Vernon stare at the ruined rifle like it might explain itself. He watched Dudley, who had gone quiet in a way Dudley never went quiet, edge further into the corner, eyeing Diana the way you'd eye a large dog of uncertain temperament. So, Harry said into the silence, mostly because somebody had to say something and he was tired of the weight of it. Am I what did you call yourself? A circus performer's kid. For the first time since the door came off its hinges, Diana looked at him and something in her face eased, cracked open into an expression that was almost unmistakably a smile. No, she said, you are the son of a queen, and it is well past time somebody told you so. There was a knock at the ruined doorframe about 20 minutes later, a polite knock, all things considered, given that there was no longer a door to knock on, and an enormous, shaggy-bearded man in a moleskin overcoat the size of a small tent ducked his head into the shack, holding a lantern, looking deeply put out. Blimey, he said, taking in the door on the floor, the ruined rifle, the small blond boy cowering in the corner, and the tall armored woman crouched beside Harry with one hand on his shoulder. I was told this to be a straightforward pickup. Who exactly? Diana asked, without hostility but without much patience either. Are you? Rubeus Hagrid, said the enormous man, straightening to his full and considerable height, and offering a hand the size of a dinner plate, which Diana shook without appearing remotely intimidated by its size. Keeper o' Keys and Grounds at Hogwarts, sent by Professor Dumbledore to fetch young Harry here for his letter, seeing as it appeared these lot, a scowl at the Dursleys, weren't inclined to deliver it themselves. He peered past Diana at Harry, and his scowl melted into something warmer, wetter around the eyes. Blimey, look at ye. Last time I saw ye, you were no bigger'n a loaf o' bread. You've seen me before? Harry asked. Carried ye myself the night your parents, Hagrid stopped, glanced uncertainly at Diana, seemed to register for the first time that he'd walked into the middle of something much larger and stranger than a simple letter delivery. Beggin' your pardon, but who exactly are you, if ye don't mind my askin'? Never seen armor like that outside a museum. Diana, she said, Harry's mother. Hagrid blinked slowly, the way a man does when a piece of furniture he's known his whole life turns out to have a secret drawer. I was under the impression, he said carefully, that Lily Potter was his mother in every way that mattered for raising him, and I do not intend to diminish that, Diana said, in a tone that suggested she'd had a version of this conversation already and would rather not repeat it in full. But biology is biology, Mr. Hagrid, and biology in this case is somewhat unusual. I imagine your headmaster will have questions. I have several of my own that I intend to ask him directly. Tonight. Ah, said Hagrid, in the tone of a man deciding wisely not to argue with several thousand years of implied seniority. Well, reckon that's between grown-ups then, eh? Meantime, and his face brightened considerably as he turned back to Harry, reaching into an inside pocket of the vast coat. Happy birthday, Harry. Bit squashed, I'm afraid. Sat on it common over, but the taste'll still be there. He produced a slightly crumpled box that, when opened, revealed a large, sticky chocolate cake with "Happy Birthday, Harry" written on it in green icing. And Harry, who had never once in his life received a birthday cake, who had spent 10 previous birthdays entirely unremarked, unmarked, uncelebrated, found himself, to his own considerable surprise, close to crying over a slightly squashed cake handed to him by a giant stranger in a moleskin coat. "Nobody's ever," he started and had to stop and cleared his throat and tried again. "Nobody's ever done that before, given me something for my birthday." The temperature in the room, already cold from the storm, seemed to drop several further degrees, and this time it had nothing to do with magic and everything to do with the look Diana turned on the Dursleys, a look with 2,000 years of controlled fury compressed behind eyes that had watched empires rise and fall and found most of them wanting. "We are leaving," she said. "Now, Mr. Hagrid, I understand you have instructions to deliver him to Hogwarts, or at minimum to see him equipped for it. I would ask that you accompany us. I have questions about this school, and I intend for my son to see rather more of the wizarding world in the coming weeks than a shopping trip on a particular street would normally provide." Said Hagrid, looking between the ruined door, the folded rifle, and the deeply unnerving calm of Petunia's silence. "Right, yeah. Whatever you say, Miss Diana is sufficient." "Right, Diana." He said it like he wasn't entirely sure it was allowed. "Best be off, then, before the tide turns and strands the lot of us on this rock." Harry stood, still holding the cake box, and looked back once at the Dursleys, Vernon staring fixedly at the ruined rifle as though it were the only safe thing left to look at, Petunia white and rigid and refusing to meet his eyes, Dudley pressed so far into the corner he'd nearly become part of the wall. He waited to feel something large about it, grief, maybe, or triumph, some enormous cathartic thing that 10 years of misery ought to demand as its price. What he actually felt, standing there in the ruin of the world's worst holiday shack with a birthday cake in his hands and a mother he'd known for 20 minutes at his side, was mostly just tired and mostly just relieved, and underneath both of those, something quieter and steadier that he wouldn't have a proper word for until much later, when he understood enough about who Diana was and what she'd built her whole existence around to recognize it for what it was. He felt, for the first time he could remember, safe, in a way that had nothing to do with locks or bolts, and everything to do with the simple fact that no one in this room, or possibly in the whole world, could hurt him now if this woman decided otherwise. "Bye then," he said to the Dursleys, because some scrap of politeness in him refused to die even now, and got no answer, and found, walking out through the space where the door used to be, into a storm that seemed oddly to be already dying down around Diana, as though even the weather knew better than to keep testing her, that he didn't especially mind the silence. Outside, the boat Hagrid had arrived in bobbed against the rocks, absurdly small for 4 people, one of them the size of a small building. Diana looked at it for a long moment with an expression Harry would come to recognize over the following weeks as "this will not be necessary," and then simply picked Harry up under one arm, not roughly, but with the easy, unthinking strength of someone lifting a bag of shopping, and said, "Hold your breath if you're nervous. You won't need to, but some people find it helps," and stepped off the rock into the churning Black Sea. They did not sink. They did not even get particularly wet. Diana walked across the surface of the water as though it were packed sand, storm waves parting gently around her ankles, and behind them Harry heard Hagrid's delighted, disbelieving laughter and the frantic slap of oars as he tried, and comically failed, to keep pace in the rowboat. "Blimey," Hagrid kept saying over and over into the wind. "Blimey. Oh, blimey." Harry looked up at the woman carrying him like he weighed nothing at all, storm-lit and unbothered, striding across a sea that should have drowned them both twice over by now, and asked the only question that felt, in that moment, like it actually mattered. "Am I going to be able to do that? Walk on water?" Diana glanced down at him, and there was something fierce and warm and entirely unguarded in her face that hadn't been there in the shack, something that told Harry, more clearly than any words could have, exactly how much of the last 10 years she intended to spend making up for. "Little one," she said, "by the time I'm finished with you, water will be the least impressive thing you can walk across." Behind them, miles and continents away in a room lit by a static mirror that had gone at last, entirely dark, a woman who had waited 2,000 years for a crack in Themyscira's perfect armor smiled slowly to herself in the candlelight, and began, with great and patient care, to plan. Chapter 2. Themyscira's shadow. Hagrid's boat reached shore an hour before dawn, and by then he had stopped saying "blimey" and started saying nothing at all, which Harry privately thought was probably a bigger achievement for the man. They didn't go to London straight away. Diana set Harry down on a stretch of wet sand somewhere on the Kent coast, water steaming faintly off her boots in the cold morning air, and turned to Hagrid with the particular patience of someone about to ask a question she suspected she wasn't going to like the answer to. "Take me to your headmaster," she said. "Now, if it can be managed. I have gone 11 years without answers I am owed, and I find my tolerance for waiting has run out." Hagrid rubbed at the back of his neck, looking uncomfortable in the specific way of a man caught between two authorities he didn't feel qualified to referee. "Professor Dumbledore's a busy man, o' course, but reckon he'd want to see ye himself, given, well," he gestured vaguely at Diana's entire existence. "Given all this." "Given all this," Diana agreed, dry as sand. They took what Hagrid called the night bus, which turned out to be a violently purple triple-decker that screeched into existence out of nowhere with a bang loud enough to wake half the coastline, driven by a shrunken-headed old man who took one look at Diana's armor, one look at the way she stood, feet planted, weight balanced, a woman who had never once in her life needed to hold onto a railing, and charged her nothing at all for the fare, which Harry gathered from Hagrid's muttering was extremely unusual. The bus flung itself across England in a series of stomach-dropping lurches that had Harry gripping the seat and Hagrid turning faintly green, while Diana stood in the aisle without holding anything, unbothered, watching the London skyline assemble itself out the window with an expression Harry couldn't quite read, something between curiosity and old grief. "You've been here before," Harry said. It wasn't really a question. "I have been to this city more times than I can count," Diana said. "The last time was different circumstances. Circumstances I will tell you about, in full, when there is time to do it properly and not on a bus that appears to be actively trying to kill us." The bus screeched to a stop outside a small, grubby pub squeezed between a bookshop and a record store, a pub that Harry, looking directly at it, realized he could see, while the people flowing past it on the pavement seemed to walk right by without a flicker of notice, eyes sliding over the sign that read the leaky cauldron like it wasn't there at all. "Muggles can't see it," Hagrid explained, catching Harry's look. "Magic folk only." "I'm not magic folk," Diana said, mildly amused, "and I can see it fine." Hagrid opened his mouth, closed it again, and decided, wisely, Harry thought, not to pursue that particular thread any further before breakfast. Albus Dumbledore's office at Hogwarts was, Harry would learn much later, usually reached by a spiral staircase that unfolded itself behind a stone gargoyle guarding a password nobody outside the school was meant to know. Diana did not use the staircase. She walked directly up to the gargoyle, looked it in its carved stone eyes, and said, "Move." The gargoyle considered this. Harry watched it actually consider, a slow grinding shift of granite features, and then, apparently deciding that whatever ancient authority stood in front of it outranked whatever enchantment had been placed on it centuries ago, stepped aside without complaint. "That's never happened before," Hagrid said, somewhere behind them, sounding faintly scandalized. The staircase carried them up in silence, and at the top, the office door opened before Diana had even raised her hand to knock, revealing a room stuffed floor to ceiling with curious silver instruments, sleeping portraits, and a phoenix on a golden perch that opened one bright eye, looked at Diana, and made a soft, approving trilling sound quite unlike the alarmed reaction most visitors apparently provoke. Behind the desk sat an old man with a beard long enough to tuck into his belt, half-moon spectacles, and robes the deep purple of a bruise, who rose the moment the door opened and looked at Diana with an expression that told Harry immediately that this man had at some point met her before and had not enjoyed it. "Diana," Dumbledore said, "it has been rather a long time." "Not nearly long enough for the conversation we're about to have," Diana said. "Sit down, Albus. This will take a while, and I would rather you were comfortable, because I am not going to be gentle about it." Dumbledore sat. Harry found himself steered into a chair by the door, Hagrid hovering awkwardly beside him with the cake box still under one arm, while Diana remained standing, deliberately, Harry suspected, so that even seated, Dumbledore had to tilt his head up to meet her eyes. "You knew," Diana said. No preamble. "You knew what he was the moment Lily died and left him behind, and you sent him to that house anyway, and you left him there for 10 years without once checking whether the wards you're so proud of were protecting him, or simply keeping him contained like an animal in a cage." "The wards protected him from Voldemort's followers," Dumbledore began. "The wards," Diana said, in a voice that had gone very quiet and very dangerous, "protected him from wizards. They did nothing whatsoever about the people inside the house, who locked a child in a cupboard for a decade because they were frightened of him, and you would have known that, Albus, if you had checked even once instead of leaving it to an old woman with cats to watch from a window." Something in Dumbledore's face shifted, not defensiveness, Harry noticed, but something closer to genuine, weary regret. "I made the best decisions I could with the information I had," he said. "Lily's blood protection required him to live with blood relatives. There were no other blood relatives. There was me." The words dropped into the room like stones into still water. "I did not know," Dumbledore said carefully, "that such a thing was even possible. Lily Evans never once, in all the years I knew her, indicated that Harry's father was anyone other than James Potter. I would remind you with respect that James raised him, or intended to, for over a year before. James Potter was a good man, and I have no wish to diminish what he was to Harry, brief as it was," Diana said. "But James Potter is not the reason a cricket ball bounces off my son's skull without leaving a mark, and I think you know that, Albus, because I think you have known for years exactly what strange things have been happening in that house on Privet Drive, and you chose to write them off rather than ask the harder questions." Dumbledore was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke again, his voice had lost its careful diplomatic smoothness. "I will not pretend I handled this well," he said. "I trusted a system that was designed for ordinary circumstances, applied to a boy who was never ordinary, and I did not look closely enough at the difference between the two. That is a failure I will have to live with. But I would ask, and I ask this honestly, not as a deflection, what would you have had me do 11 years ago? I did not know you existed. Lily never told anyone. There was no address for Themyscira in any registry I have access to. You could have asked harder questions when a boy his age was showing accidental magic strong enough to be reported to the Ministry 3 separate times," Diana said. "That much at least was within your power, and you did not do it." Harry, sitting quietly by the door with the cake box balanced on his knees, found himself watching this exchange with a strange, distant sort of fascination. Nobody had ever argued about him like this before, not for him, not with this kind of ferocity, weighing his welfare like it mattered, like it was worth an old, powerful man being made genuinely uncomfortable in his own office. It was disorienting. It also, somewhere under the discomfort, felt good, in a way he didn't have language for yet. For what it's worth, he said into a pause, and both adults turned to look at him like they'd forgotten he could speak. I'm not actually that bothered about the cupboard anymore. I mean, I was. But I've got a mum who tears doors off hinges now, so, he shrugged. Feels like it evens out. Dumbledore's mouth twitched, despite himself, into something that wasn't quite a smile. Diana's expression softened by degrees, the fury banking down without quite going out. That is generous of you, Dumbledore said. More generous, I suspect, than the situation strictly deserves. Harry, I owe you an apology I don't think will mean very much coming this late, but I will give it anyway. I am sorry. I should have looked closer. I did not, and you paid for that. Okay, Harry said, because he genuinely didn't know what else to say to that, and because some part of him, the part that had spent 10 years learning not to expect apologies from anyone, didn't quite trust what to do with one when it actually arrived. Diana finally sat, lowering herself into the chair across from Dumbledore with the controlled grace of someone choosing to de-escalate rather than lacking the energy to keep going. I want 3 things from you, Albus, she said, and then we can discuss the school itself, which I understand my son is meant to attend in September. Name them. First, I will be taking Harry for the remainder of the summer, 6 weeks. I intend to teach him things about himself that no wizard school can, and I will not be asking your permission, only informing you as a courtesy. Second, whatever protections you believe your wards provide, understand that I will be establishing my own, and mine will not fail because a boy grows a few inches or a curse gets creative. Third, and here, for the first time, something genuinely uncertain crossed her face, something that looked almost like vulnerability. Tell me about Lily. Properly. Not the version in the reports. I knew her for 11 days, 11 years ago, and I have spent every year since wondering what kind of woman she became, raising my son as her own, and I never got to ask her. Dumbledore looked at her for a long moment, and something passed between them that Harry didn't fully understand, an old grief, recognizing another old grief. She was the bravest person I ever taught, Dumbledore said quietly. And she loved him, loves him still, I have no doubt, wherever love like that goes, without a single reservation, from the day he was born until the day she died protecting him. Whatever else is true about this strange and complicated situation, that much was never in question. Diana nodded once, and did not trust herself to speak again for a while. And Harry, watching his mother's jaw tighten against emotion she clearly considered a private thing, understood for the first time that whatever had happened between Diana and Lily 11 years ago had left marks that had nothing to do with magic at all. They did not go straight to Diagon Alley. Diana took Harry instead to a stretch of coastline in Wales that Hagrid dropped them at with visible reluctance and several worried backward glances, a wild empty shoreline with cliffs and gulls and no other living soul for miles. And there she set down a bag she'd apparently been carrying the whole time without Harry noticing, and looked at him with the expression of someone about to begin something important. "We have 6 weeks," she said. "I would have liked 6 years. 6 weeks will have to be enough to start." "Start what?" "Teaching you what you are," Diana said. "Not what wizards will tell you at their school. That will matter too, in its way, and I don't intend to undermine it. But before you learn to hold a wand, you are going to learn to hold your own strength without flinching from it. Because I have watched what happens to children who grow up believing power is something to hide, and I will not let that happen to my son." She crouched, picked up a boulder from the beach, a genuinely enormous thing, the size of a small car, half buried in sand, and lifted it clear off the ground with one hand, as easily as picking up a stone to skip across water, and held it out toward him. "Your turn," Harry stared at it. "I can't lift that." "You broke a bolt hinge with your fist while asleep," Diana said. "You unmade a pane of reinforced zoo glass without touching it. You have been doing things like this your entire life and calling it an accident because nobody ever told you it might be on purpose. I am telling you now, it is not an accident. Lift the rock." Harry approached it slowly, feeling faintly ridiculous, and put both hands under one edge, and heaved with everything he had, expecting, genuinely expecting, nothing to happen except a very sore back. The boulder came up off the sand like it weighed nothing at all, and Harry, overbalancing from the sheer unexpected ease of it, staggered backward and sat down hard on the beach with the boulder still gripped in both hands above him, and started, helplessly, to laugh. "There," Diana said, and there was something fierce and proud in her voice that Harry felt land somewhere deep in his chest, somewhere that had been empty for a very long time. "Now you know. Put it down gently. That's someone's beach, even out here, and I'd rather not explain a crater to the local wildlife trust." He set it down, too hard, cracking it clean in half, which made Diana laugh, actually laugh, a real, surprised bark of sound that transformed her whole face, and sat there on the sand grinning at his own hands like he'd never seen them before. "I could have done that the whole time," he said. "This whole time, and nobody ever told you," Diana finished, and some of the humor drained back out of her voice, replaced by something harder. "That ends now. You are never again going to wonder whether you're allowed to be strong, Harry. You are never going to apologize for it, or shrink yourself down to make smaller people comfortable, or believe for one single second that your nature is something shameful. Do you understand me?" "Yeah," Harry said, and found, to his own faint surprise, that he actually meant it, that some old crooked shape in him he hadn't known was crooked was straightening out even as she said it. "Yeah, I understand." "Good. Now get up. We're doing that another 200 times before lunch." The 6 weeks that followed didn't feel, to Harry, anything like what he imagined training was supposed to feel like from the books he'd occasionally managed to read at the school library before Dudley or a teacher confiscated them. There were no montages of gritted teeth and steady improvement. There was, mostly, Diana laughing at him when he overcorrected and put his own fist through a boulder he'd only meant to tap, and Diana going very quiet and patient when he got frustrated and started to spiral into the old privet drive habit of assuming failure meant he deserved whatever came next, and Diana, on the 4th night, sitting across a driftwood fire from him, and finally, properly, telling him the truth about where he came from. "Themyscira," she said, "is an island that does not exist on any map you will ever be shown, hidden by magic older than the wizards you'll be studying with, populated entirely by women, Amazons. We are called, though the word has drifted strangely across history and picked up meanings that have nothing to do with us. We are warriors. We were made, sculpted from clay and given life by Aphrodite, if you want the myth exactly as it's told, though I've come to think the truth of it is more complicated than any one story captures, to be a bulwark against the worst cruelties of men and gods alike. I was born there. I was raised there. For most of my life, I believed I would never leave it. What changed? A pilot's plane crashed into our waters," Diana said, and something warm crossed her face, quick and private. "That's a longer story for another night. What matters for tonight is that leaving the island meant entering a world I did not understand, full of people who did not understand me either, and in the middle of that unfamiliar world, 11 years before you were born, I met your mother. Lily." "Lily," Diana agreed. "There was a woman, is a woman. I have no reason to think she died, only that she vanished from notice for a long time, who had stolen an artifact of considerable danger from a place it should never have left, a mirror that could tear holes between worlds if handled carelessly enough. Lily's order had tracked it into Muggle London. My people had tracked it from the other direction. We collided, quite literally, in a warehouse near the docks, both of us furious that the other had gotten there first, both of us far too stubborn to simply work together at the start of it. Sounds like you got along great, Harry said, deadpan, and Diana snorted, an actual snort, undignified and human, that made him grin. We did eventually, once we stopped trying to prove who was more capable of handling the situation alone, she admitted. 11 days we worked together, hunting that mirror down before it could be used. 11 days is not very long by any measure. It felt longer. Your mother had a kind of courage that had nothing to do with strength. She stood her ground against things that could have killed her 100 times over, not because she didn't understand the danger, but because she decided the danger mattered less than doing the right thing. I had never met anyone quite like her. I don't think I have since either, and I have met a great many people in a very long life. She was quiet for a moment, staring into the fire, and Harry, who had learned over 4 days to recognize when she needed the silence rather than a question filling it, waited. What happened between us, Diana said eventually, is between two adults who cared for each other deeply and knew, both of us, that it could not last beyond those 11 days. I had duties on Themyscira I could not abandon, and Lily had a life already taking shape in a world I could only ever visit, not live in. We parted as friends who loved each other and understood the shape of what we could and couldn't be to one another. I did not know she was carrying you until nearly a year later, when word finally reached me, and by the time it did, she had already married James Potter, already built a life she seemed happy in, and she asked me, through the one channel of communication we still shared, not to disrupt it. She said James loved you as his own and never needed to know otherwise, and that it would be simpler, kinder, for everyone if it stayed that way. Did you agree? I agreed because I loved her enough to respect what she asked of me, and because I believed, wrongly as it turns out, that agreeing meant you would grow up safe and wanted regardless of whose blood ran in you, Diana said, and her voice, when it came, was raw in a way Harry hadn't heard from her yet. I did not know she died until nearly a week after it happened. By the time I learned, you had already been placed with her sister, and every channel I tried to use to reach you afterward met resistance. I did not understand at the time, and understand rather better now. Having met Albus Dumbledore's particular brand of well-meaning obstruction firsthand, I spent 10 years being told by people who claimed to know better that the situation was handled, that you were safe, that intervening would cause more harm than good. I believed them longer than I should have. That is a mistake I will spend the rest of my life making up for, and I need you to know that it was never, not for one single day, because I didn't want you. Harry looked at the fire for a long time, turning that over, feeling something in his chest that was too big and too tangled to name properly, grief for a mother he barely remembered, and something else entirely for the one sitting across from him. Something that wasn't quite forgiveness yet but was moving in that direction, unhurried, the way things move when they're allowed to happen at their own pace instead of being forced. I'm not mad at you, he said finally. I thought I might be when you said all that. But I'm not. You came the second you found out for certain. That's more than anyone else ever did. Diana didn't say anything to that. She reached across the fire instead and put one hand gently over his, and they sat there for a long time without speaking. And it was, Harry thought, one of the best silences of his entire life. The training sharpened as the weeks went on, less about brute strength and more about the things Diana called the harder disciplines: balance, judgment, restraint. She had him spar with her, barehanded, on the sand at low tide, and the first dozen times he ended up flat on his back within seconds, laughing despite himself, while Diana explained, patient and relentless, exactly what he'd done wrong. Strength without control is a liability, not an asset, she told him, hauling him back up by one arm after putting him down for the 14th time that afternoon. Any fool with enough raw power can knock down a wall. It takes discipline to know when the wall shouldn't be knocked down at all, to hit exactly as hard as the situation requires, and no harder, and to know the difference between the two in the half-second where it matters. "Feels like you're telling me to hold back," Harry said, a little sullenly, wiping sand off his elbow. "I am telling you the opposite," Diana said. "Holding back out of fear is what your relatives taught you without meaning to. That terrible, apologetic smallness some people carry their whole lives because someone told them their nature was dangerous, and they believed it. That is not what I am teaching you. I am teaching you precision. There is a difference between a warrior who is afraid of her own strength and a warrior who has mastered it so completely that restraint becomes just another form of power. The second is worth 10 of the first, and it is the only kind of strength I will accept from my son." It landed, that distinction, in a way that pure encouragement hadn't quite managed to. Harry thought about the cricket ball, about the glass in the reptile house, about 10 years of not understanding his own body, and thought, too, about the boulder he'd cracked in half without meaning to on the very first day. Precision, not smallness, something in between that he was only just beginning to feel the shape of. By the 5th week he could hold his own against her for nearly a full minute before she put him down, which, given that Diana was, by her own casual admission, capable of leveling small buildings without particularly trying, struck Harry as a genuinely astonishing improvement. And on the last night before they were due back in London for school shopping, she sat him down and taught him something that had nothing to do with fighting at all. "There is a bracelet," she said, producing from her bag 2 slim cuffs of the same dull bronze gold as her own bracers, "that I want you to wear from tomorrow onward. It will not stop every curse a wizard might throw at you. You do not need it for most of them, frankly. Your own blood handles that well enough. But it will steady you against the kind of magic that tries to unmake rather than merely harm. There are things in that world you're walking into that I do not fully understand yet, and I would rather you carry a shield you don't need than lack one you do." Harry turned the bracelet over in his hands, lighter than it looked, warm, almost humming faintly against his palm. "Themyscira make these." "I made this one," Diana said, "for you this week, in the evenings after you fell asleep exhausted from getting thrown into the sand. Don't lose it." Harry looked up at her, and something about the plain, undemonstrative fact of it, that she'd spent her nights, after long days of teaching him to fight, making him a gift with her own hands, hit him harder than any of the training had. "Thanks," he said, because it felt like too small a word and he didn't have a bigger one ready yet. "Put it on," Diana said, gruff, looking away toward the sea in a way that told him she was more affected by the moment than she wanted to admit. "Tomorrow we go buy you a wand, and I intend to be thoroughly unimpressed by whatever passes for security in that shopping street of theirs." Diagon Alley, as it turned out, gave Diana ample opportunity to be thoroughly unimpressed. They arrived through the leaky cauldron at mid-morning, and the moment they stepped through the brick archway into the crooked, crowded street beyond, Harry understood, in one overwhelming rush, exactly what all the fuss about magic had been building toward. Shopfronts crammed with cauldrons and broomsticks and owls in cages, a window full of what turned out to be actual, living dragon eggs, according to a very excited boy pressed against the glass, robes that changed color as people walked past wearing them, the low, constant thrum of 100 small magics happening simultaneously in every direction. He did not gawk quietly, the way perhaps a more cautious child might have. He walked down the middle of the street with his chin up and his mother's bracelet on his wrist, taking it all in with open, delighted curiosity. And when a display of self-stirring cauldrons in a shop window caught his eye and toppled slightly as he leaned too close, he simply caught the whole rack before it could crash to the cobbles, one hand, no visible effort, and set it back upright, and kept walking without a flicker of embarrassment. Several people had stopped to stare. Harry noticed. He did not particularly care. "You're not going to tell me to be careful about that?" he asked Diana, half teasing as they walked on. "Why would I? You caught it. Nothing broke. If people wish to stare because a boy has quick hands, let them stare." She glanced sideways at him, something dry and amused in her expression. "I did not raise you for 6 weeks to watch you flinch the first time a stranger looks at you twice." They visited Gringotts first, a goblin bank buried deep underground, reached by a cart ride down twisting tunnels at a speed that had Harry whooping with delight rather than fear, much to the visible surprise of the goblin driving it, where Harry discovered, with considerable astonishment, that his parents had left him rather more gold than he'd ever conceived of owning, more than enough for school and considerably more besides. Then to Ollivander's, a narrow, dusty shop that smelled of old wood and older magic, where a pale-eyed old man with wild white hair took one look at Harry and went very still. "Curious," Mr. Ollivander murmured, circling him slowly, tape measure fluttering unassisted around Harry's outstretched arm without anyone touching it. "Very curious indeed." "What's curious?" Harry asked. "I sold your mother's wand," Ollivander said. "Willow, 10¼ inches, swishy, good for charm work. And your father's mahogany, rather more excellent for transfiguration. I remember every wand I've ever sold, Mr. Potter. But I confess I have never measured a customer whose arm gave back such peculiar readings." He glanced briefly at Diana, standing near the door with her arms folded, watching with the patient, faintly territorial attention of a mother assessing whether a stranger deserved to be near her son at all. "There is something in the blood here that isn't purely wizard, I think." "You'd be right about that," Diana said, unbothered by being read so plainly. Ollivander did not ask further. He simply nodded once, like a man filing away a fact for later consideration, and set about the business of matching Harry to a wand, which took considerably longer than it apparently usually did. Box after box tried and rejected, sparks fizzling wrong or nothing happening at all, until finally a long, thin box near the back of the shop, holly and phoenix feather, 11 inches, produced a shower of red and gold sparks the moment Harry's fingers closed around it, bright enough to light the whole dim shop. "Curious," Ollivander said again, very softly, staring at the wand in Harry's hand with an expression Harry couldn't quite parse. "The phoenix who gave the feather for that wand gave only one other feather in all its long life, just one other wand. And its owner," he stopped himself, seemed to reconsider, and simply said, "I think, Mr. Potter, that we can expect great things from you. Whether they turn out to be good great things remains, as it always does, entirely up to you." Harry paid for the wand, 7 galleons, which felt absurd for a stick of wood and a feather, though he could already feel a faint, pleasant warmth humming up his arm from it that told him it was worth every nut, and left the shop with Diana's hand resting briefly, warm, on the back of his neck. "He knows something," Harry said once they were back out on the street. "About the wand. He didn't say all of it." "No," Diana agreed. "He didn't. We'll find out eventually, I imagine. Most secrets in that world seem to have a way of surfacing at precisely the moment they'll cause the most trouble." They were nearly finished. Robes bought. Cauldron bought. An owl Harry named Hedwig within about 4 seconds of setting eyes on her because the name simply felt correct the instant he thought it, when a boy about Harry's age caught sight of them outside Madame Malkin's, pale and sharp-featured, flanked by an older man with the same cold, aristocratic bearing. "You're Harry Potter," the boy said, not quite a question, looking Harry over with the particular assessing sneer of someone who'd been raised to catalog exactly where everyone stood relative to him. "I heard you were staying with Muggles." "Was," Harry said easily. "Not any more." The boy's eyes flicked, curious despite himself, to Diana, taking in the height of her, the faint bronze glint of the bracers under her cloak, the way she stood like the street belonged to her and always had. "Who's she?" "My mother," Harry said, and didn't elaborate, because he was rapidly discovering that he enjoyed watching people try and fail to categorize her. "Draco Malfoy," the boy said, extending a hand with the air of someone bestowing a great favor. "You'll want to be careful who you make friends with at Hogwarts, Potter. Some families are better than others." Harry looked at the offered hand for a moment and then shook it firmly, easily, without any particular effort at all, and said mildly, "I'll bear that in mind. For what it's worth, I don't think much of judging people before I've met them. Bit of a waste of time, that." Draco's father, Lucius, though he didn't introduce himself yet, watched this exchange with narrowed, calculating eyes and said nothing, though something in his expression suggested he'd be filing the encounter away for later consideration too, much like Ollivander had. Harry noticed it. He didn't especially care about that either. Whatever games these wizarding families liked to play with bloodlines and old grudges, he'd spent the last 6 weeks learning that he answered to exactly one code now, one he could feel settling into his bones the way Diana had taught it. Strength without cruelty, confidence without apology, and absolutely no patience left over for anyone who mistook his easy manner for something soft. Draco withdrew his hand, looking faintly wrong-footed by an answer that hadn't given him the reaction he'd clearly expected, and Diana, watching the whole thing with quiet amusement, steered Harry gently onward toward the next shop. "You handled that well," she said, once they were out of earshot. "He was trying to figure out if I was scared of him," Harry said. "Wasn't sure why I'd be." "No," Diana agreed, and there was real warmth in it, real pride, the kind that didn't need to be said outright because it was written plainly across her whole face. "Neither am I." That night, in the room above the leaky cauldron they'd taken for their last few days before the school term, Diana sat by the window a long while after Harry had gone to sleep, watching the crooked rooftops of the wizarding street below, thinking about the 6 weeks that had passed, and the far longer stretch of school year now waiting on the other side of it. A place she could not follow him into. Not easily. Not without breaking rules she suspected mattered a great deal to the fragile balance of that world. She did not see the thin thread of scrying magic that brushed against the edges of the room and withdrew again, just as quietly, having gathered exactly what it came for. A clear look at the boy sleeping in the other bed, wand propped against the nightstand, bronze bracelet still on his wrist even in sleep, strong and unafraid, and entirely unaware that somewhere far away, an ancient queen who had waited 2,000 years for exactly this kind of opportunity had just confirmed, with great satisfaction, that the boy was every bit as promising as she'd hoped. Circe withdrew the spell and turned from her mirror and began, at last, to write a letter, carefully, in a spidery old hand, addressed to a man who did not yet know his name would one day be spoken alongside hers in the history of what was about to happen to the wizarding world. "Dear Professor Quirrell," it began, "I understand you have taken an interest in ancient and forgotten magics. I believe I can be of considerable use to you, and I believe in turn that you may be able to be of use to me when the time comes, regarding a certain student soon to arrive at your school." Chapter 3. The Sorting and the Snake. Platform 9 3/4 didn't so much appear as unfold, the way most things in this world seemed to when Harry stopped expecting them to behave normally. A brick archway between platforms 9 and 10 that a portly guard walked straight past without seeing, and beyond it, impossibly, a scarlet steam engine belching smoke into a sky that had no business fitting inside a train station in the first place. Diana walked him through the archway with one hand resting lightly on his shoulder, And if she felt any of the tension Harry half expected from a mother about to hand her son over to a world she couldn't fully follow him into, she didn't show it. She'd told him the night before, over a very good dinner at the Leaky Cauldron that had involved Tom the barman going pale and refusing to charge them for a second time in a row, that she intended never to let him see her afraid of anything, on principle, whether or not the fear was real. "I don't like this part," she admitted now, standing on the platform amid a churning crowd of trunks and owls and parents fussing over children in matching robes, and Harry noted, with some private satisfaction, that she was breaking her own rules slightly to tell him so. "I have fought gods and lost less sleep over it than I have over the idea of putting you on that train without me." "I'll be fine," Harry said. "You made sure of that, pretty thoroughly actually." "I made sure your body could survive nearly anything that world might throw at it," Diana said. "I have somewhat less control over whether your heart survives it intact, and that worries me rather more." She crouched. Didn't need to, not really. He'd grown 2 inches over the summer under her care and eaten more regular meals than in his previous 10 years combined. But she did it anyway, the way she always did when she wanted him to know a conversation mattered, and fixed him with a look that had nothing soft in it at all, only fierce and absolute conviction. "You are going to meet people at that school who will try to define you by what happened when you were a baby, or by what blood runs in you, or by rumors that will inevitably distort into something unrecognizable within a week. None of that is who you are. You decide who you are every single day by what you choose to do. Do you understand?" "Yeah," Harry said. "I understand." "Good. Then go make friends. Break at least one rule you consider genuinely stupid, and do not, under any circumstances, let anyone at that school make you feel small. If someone tries, you tell me, and I will handle it personally, and I promise you I will not be gentle about it." Harry grinned, hauled his trunk toward the train with an ease that made a passing mother do a visible double-take, and looked back once before boarding. "Love you," he said, a little awkwardly, because it was still new to say and he hadn't quite gotten used to the shape of the words yet, 6 weeks in. Diana's whole face changed, the fierce readiness melting, just for a second, into something raw and unguarded, and she said, "I love you too. More than I have words for, and I have had 2,000 years to collect words." She straightened, composed herself, and the warrior queen returned to her posture just as the train's whistle sounded. "Go on, before I decide 6 weeks wasn't nearly enough and steal you back." He found an empty compartment near the back of the train and had barely gotten his trunk stowed above the seat when the door slid open, and a red-haired boy poked his head in, freckled, gangly, wearing robes that had clearly been someone else's first. "Everywhere else is full," the boy said. "Mind if I sit here?" "Go ahead," Harry said. The boy dropped onto the seat opposite with the particular relief of someone who'd been dragging a trunk around for longer than he wanted to admit, and stuck out a hand. "Ron Weasley. Harry Potter." Ron's eyes went wide, and then wider, tracking almost involuntarily to Harry's forehead. And Harry, who had over the summer developed a fairly settled relationship with the scar hidden under his fringe, simply reached up and brushed his hair aside without being asked, because he'd decided somewhere around week 3 of training on that Welsh beach that he wasn't going to spend his life being cagey about the one thing everyone apparently wanted to gawk at anyway. "Blimey," Ron said, echoing Hagrid so precisely that Harry laughed out loud. "So it's true. You really are, I mean, everyone knows about you. Obviously, the whole wizarding world basically," my brother Charlie said. "I know what everyone knows," Harry said, not unkindly. "The bit where I was a baby and a curse bounced. I don't actually remember any of it, so don't feel bad if it's a letdown that I can't tell you anything interesting about it." "It's not that," Ron said, though he looked briefly deflated anyway. "It's just you don't look like what I expected." "What you expect?" Ron considered this with the seriousness of someone who had genuinely spent time thinking about it. Dunno, bigger scar maybe. Or, I dunno, more of a look about you. Like you'd walk around with a permanently serious face, being the boy who lived and all that. Nah, Harry said. Turns out surviving a curse as a baby doesn't really give you much to be serious about at 11. It's the stuff that happens after that tends to shape you more. Something about the way he said it, easy, unbothered, faintly amused at the whole business of his own fame, seemed to put Ron considerably more at ease. And within 20 minutes they were deep into an argument about whether the Chudley Cannons had any realistic hope of the league this season. Ron. Passionately, defensively, yes, Harry. Cheerfully skeptical, having read exactly one Quidditch magazine Diana had bought him on impulse in Diagon Alley, and retained all of it with the effortless total recall that seemed to be one more strange gift buried in his blood, when the compartment door slid open again. A round-faced boy stood in the doorway, looking close to tears. Sorry, has anyone seen a toad? I've lost one, he keeps getting away from me. Haven't seen him, mate, Ron said. Neville, isn't it? Your grandson, the one who… Yeah, Neville said, going pink, in the tone of someone extremely tired of being introduced by reference to his grandmother. I'll help you look, Harry offered, standing, and something in his voice, a plain, unforced willingness that didn't seem to expect anything back for it, made Neville's shoulders drop half an inch in relief. They found the toad, eventually, 2 compartments down, sitting placidly on the shoulder of a bushy-haired girl who was lecturing its apparent owner, a pale boy with a superior sneer that Harry recognized instantly, about the precise incantation for a levitation charm the boy had clearly gotten wrong on purpose just to needle her. Oh, is this yours? The girl said, spotting Neville, and handed the toad over with the crisp efficiency of someone checking an item off a list. I'm Hermione Granger, by the way. Have either of you tried any spells yet? I've been practicing a few, just simple ones. Though of course I only found out I was a witch this summer, so I've had to learn everything from books, which I don't think is nearly as much of a disadvantage as some people. Here a pointed look at the pale boy, who rolled his eyes so hard it was practically audible, seemed to think it is. Malfoy giving you a hard time? Harry asked, recognizing the boy from Diagon Alley. Draco's eyes snapped to Harry, and something calculating flickered across his face. Potter, didn't expect to find you slumming it with the Weasleys already. His gaze cut to Ron with obvious distaste. I did warn you about who you make friends with. You did, Harry agreed, unbothered. I told you I don't take much notice of that kind of warning. Still true. We'll see how that works out for you, Draco said, with the particular smugness of someone who'd clearly rehearsed this exact exchange in his head and hadn't gotten the reaction he wanted the first time either. Sure, Harry said, entirely pleasant, and turned back to Hermione. You said you've been practicing spells. Show us one if you fancy. I've got a wand and basically no idea what to do with it yet. Figured I'd start learning from anyone who actually knows something. Something about the easy request, not mocking, not dismissive of Draco, just simply moving past him as though he'd stopped being interesting the moment he stopped being useful, seemed to land harder than any insult could have. Draco's face went faintly pink, and he turned on his heel and left without another word, muttering something about finding better company, dragging along the 2 large, dull-eyed boys who'd been standing silently behind him the entire time like furniture nobody had thought to introduce. Hermione watched him go with an expression of pure satisfaction, then turned back to Harry with renewed enthusiasm. I've only managed Wingardium Leviosa properly so far. It took me 4 tries to get the wrist movement right, but… She demonstrated on a stray quill someone had left on the seat, and it rose, wobbling slightly, into the air, and hovered there while she beamed at it like it was the finest achievement of her life. Given everything Harry now understood about magic, he suspected, for her, it very well might be. "That's brilliant," he said, and meant it. Neville, still clutching his toad, looked between the three of them with the dawning, hopeful expression of a boy who'd expected this year to be nothing but misery, and was starting to suspect he might have been wrong. The Great Hall, when they finally arrived at Hogwarts that evening, after a boat crossing a black lake under a castle lit up like something out of a dream, all turrets and floating candles, and a ceiling enchanted to show the actual night sky, struck Harry less with awe, which was the reaction most of the first years around him seemed to be having in loud, whispered bursts, and more with a kind of settled recognition, as though some old part of him had simply been waiting to see magic done properly, and was now quietly satisfied that it existed. The Sorting Hat sat on its stool at the front, ancient and patched and faintly disreputable looking, and one by one the first years filed up to have it set on their heads and called out a house, Hufflepuff, Ravenclaw, Slytherin, Gryffindor, to scattered applause from the appropriate table each time. Granger, Hermione, called Professor McGonagall, and Hermione marched up with the tight, controlled nerves of someone who had almost certainly read every book available about the sorting process, and was still terrified it wouldn't be enough. The hat took nearly a full minute, long enough that murmurs started rippling through the hall before shouting Gryffindor, and Hermione practically ran to the table, flushed with relief. Malfoy Draco called McGonagall a while later, and the hat barely touched his head before calling Slytherin, to enthusiastic applause from a table of students who all seemed to already know exactly who he was and to approve. Then, Potter Harry. The hall went, for a moment, entirely silent, the whispering that had followed Harry's name being murmured up and down every table since they'd entered abruptly cutting off, and Harry walked up to the stool with his chin level and no particular hurry in his step, aware of several hundred pairs of eyes tracking him, and sat down, and let the hat drop over his head. "Well," said a dry, papery voice inside his mind immediately, before the hat had even settled all the way. "Now this is unusual." Unusual how? Harry thought back. "I have sorted the minds of children for nearly 1,000 years, the hat said, and I have never once had to work quite this hard to find the shape of one. There is a wizard's mind here, certainly, clever, curious, not unlike the Ravenclaws I've placed, though you wear it more loosely than most. There is bravery here that would make a Gryffindor weep with envy, and ambition too, buried under it, the kind that doesn't announce itself the way a Slytherin's usually does but runs just as deep. And underneath all of that, underneath the wizard entirely, there is something I genuinely cannot categorize. Something old. Something that was never meant to be sorted by the likes of me at all. So what do you do about that?" "I do," the hat said, with what might have been amusement, "the same thing I always do when the answer isn't obvious. I ask what you want, rather than simply telling you what you are." Harry thought about it, really thought, not performing indecision for a hall full of watching students, but genuinely weighing it, the way Diana had taught him to weigh choices that mattered. He thought about Draco's sneer, and the easy assumption of superiority radiating off the Slytherin table. He thought about the quiet, careful ambition he did carry, the part of him that had spent 10 years cataloging exactly how a house of cruel, frightened people operated, and had come out the other side determined never to be either of those things himself. He thought about Ron laughing on the train and Hermione's fierce, nervous brilliance and Neville's toad. Gryffindor, he decided, not because I'm scared of the rest, because that's where my friends are, and because bravery's the part of me I want to grow, not the part I've already got plenty of. A fair answer, the hat said. Braver, if I'm honest, than most children manage, most simply want to be told they're special. You already know that. You want to know what to do with it. A pause, and then, quieter, almost to itself. There is a shadow moving near this school already, boy. I felt it the moment I touched your mind, something that has been watching you for longer than you know. Be careful who you trust with the shape of your power. Not everyone who wants to know you well. What shadow? That, said the hat, is not mine to tell you. I sort minds. I do not read futures. And then, out loud to the hall, Gryffindor. The Gryffindor table exploded into applause, louder, if anything, than for any sorting before it, and Harry pulled the hat off, handed it back to McGonagall with a polite nod, and walked to the table where Ron was practically vibrating with delight, already shoving space open on the bench beside him. Knew it, Ron said, thumping him on the back hard enough that a lesser boy might have staggered. Harry didn't move an inch, and Ron, who hadn't quite registered yet exactly what that meant, simply grinned wider. Knew you'd end up here. Hermione, across the table, looked faintly troubled. The hat took ages with you, she said. Longer than almost anyone else tonight. What was it thinking about? Told you I'm complicated, Harry said lightly, and reached for the food that had just appeared on the table in front of him. Mountains of it. Roast chicken and potatoes and things he'd never even seen before, deciding privately that the hat's warning was something to turn over later in private, and not something to hand to the whole table on his first night. The first weeks of term settled into a rhythm that Harry found, to his own faint surprise, genuinely enjoyable, a novel enough sensation, given that school, for the whole of his life until now, had been something to survive rather than something to look forward to. He was, without particularly meaning to be, spectacularly good at transfiguration, which Professor McGonagall noted with a raised eyebrow and a slightly longer than usual look, the first time he turned a matchstick into a perfect silver needle on his second attempt, when most of the class was still struggling to get the wood to so much as sharpen at one end. Natural aptitude, Mr. Potter, she asked, examining the needle. I think I'm just good at understanding what a thing's supposed to become, Harry said, which was as close as he could get to explaining the strange, wordless certainty that seemed to guide most of what he did. The same instinct that had told him a cricket ball wouldn't hurt, now telling him, with equal confidence, exactly how a piece of wood wanted to reshape itself. He was less naturally gifted at potions, mostly because Professor Snape seemed to have decided, on sight, in a manner that had nothing to do with academic performance, and everything to do with some old grievance Harry didn't yet understand, that Harry Potter was a problem to be managed rather than a student to be taught. The man's black eyes lingered on Harry's face during the first lesson with an intensity that made half the class flinch on Harry's behalf, and when he finally spoke, his voice was silk over something much colder. Potter, Snape said, what would I get if I added powdered root of asphodel to an infusion of wormwood? I don't know, sir, Harry said honestly, since it was his first potions lesson and nobody had covered it yet. Haven't gotten that far in the book. Could probably work it out if you gave me a minute, though. Is it something to do with sleep? Asphodel's meant to be a funeral flower, isn't it, and wormwood's bitter, so I'd guess it's some kind of draft that. I did not ask you to guess, Snape said, cutting him off, though something flickered briefly across his face that might, in a more generous reading, have been surprise. Let us try again. Where, Potter, would you look if I told you to find me a bezoar? Stomach of a goat, sir. Antidote to most poisons. Harry had, in fact, read ahead, curiosity mostly, the same instinct that had made him devour every book Diana bought him over the summer, and he said it plainly, without smugness, which seemed to irritate Snape rather more than if he'd gotten it wrong. Fortunate, Snape said, after a pause. That fame doesn't excuse you from opening a textbook. 5 points from Gryffindor for the interruption regardless, which struck Harry, and most of the class, as spectacularly unfair, given that he'd been asked a direct question and answered it. But he simply shrugged, unbothered, and let it go, because he decided within about 4 minutes of meeting the man that Snape's opinion of him wasn't a battle worth fighting over yet, not while there was so much else worth his attention. Flying lessons were the first genuine surprise. Madam Hooch lined the first years up beside their broomsticks on the lawn, gave the instruction to say, "Up," firmly, and watched with visible amusement as most of the class's brooms either rolled uselessly on the ground or leapt up and smacked their owners in the face. Harry said "up" once quietly, and the broom snapped into his hand instantly, obedient as a trained animal. And when Madam Hooch gave the signal to kick off and hover, he found himself understanding the broom's balance almost immediately. The same wordless bodily certainty that had guided his fist to exactly the right pressure on that Welsh beach now guiding his weight, his grip, his sense of where up and down actually were relative to the wind. Neville, less fortunate, kicked off too early, panicked at 15 feet and lost control entirely, plummeting toward the ground with a wail that had the entire class gasping. Harry didn't think about it. He simply moved, kicking his own broom into a dive faster than should have been possible on a first-lesson broomstick, closing the gap between them in a handful of seconds, and caught Neville, actually caught him, one arm hooking under the boy's middle, absorbing the full weight and momentum of the fall without so much as a stumble in his own flight path, 3 feet from the ground, and set him down gently on his feet like he weighed nothing more than a bag of feathers. The whole class had gone silent. Madam Hooch, sprinting across the lawn with her wand already half raised for a spell that was now entirely unnecessary, stopped dead and stared. "Mr. Potter," she said when she found her voice again, "that is, I have never in 23 years of teaching seen anyone execute a rescue dive like that on a school broom. That speed shouldn't have been physically possible." "Sorry," Harry said, though he didn't sound particularly sorry, setting Neville, pale, shaking but unhurt, down and giving his shoulder a reassuring squeeze. Didn't have time to ask permission. He was about to hit the ground. "No, don't apologize for that," Madam Hooch said, recovering herself, something like professional awe warring with alarm on her face. "That was extraordinary, simply extraordinary." She looked at him a long moment, the way adults kept doing lately, cataloging something they couldn't quite name. 50 points to Gryffindor. And Mr. Potter, I'd very much like to see what you can do in a proper match when the time comes. Around him, the class had erupted into excited chatter, and Draco Malfoy, watching from across the lawn with an expression that had curdled somewhere between grudging respect and something much uglier, muttered something to the boys flanking him that Harry didn't catch and didn't particularly care to. Quirinus Quirrell taught defense against the dark arts with the perpetual, stammering nervousness of a man who flinched at his own shadow, wrapped his head in an enormous purple turban that he claimed, when asked, protected against a curse from a vampire in Albania, and generally struck most of the school as an object of mild, affectionate pity, rather than anything worth paying close attention to. Harry had a different reaction the first time he walked into the classroom. It wasn't anything visible. It was the same instinct that had warned him, wordlessly, about the cricket ball and the boulder and every other strange truth of his own body. Except now, instead of confidence, it produced something closer to a low, cold hum at the base of his skull. A feeling like standing too close to a wound that hadn't finished healing and might, given the wrong provocation, tear back open. He looked at Quirrell, stammering through the register, dropping his chalk twice, apparently the most harmless man in the building, and felt with total and unshakable certainty that something about him was deeply, fundamentally wrong. He didn't say anything about it. Not yet. He filed it away the same way he'd filed away the hat's warning, and watched quietly all through that first lesson, the way Quirrell's eyes lingered on him, too long, too still, entirely unlike the rest of the man's fluttering, anxious mannerisms, whenever he thought Harry wasn't looking. It was 3 weeks into term, on a gray Thursday evening, that Harry found himself alone in a corridor near the staff room after a Quidditch tryout ran long, and turned a corner directly into Quirrell coming the other way. Mr. Potter," Quirrell said, and the stammer Harry noticed for the first time seemed to smooth out slightly as the corridor emptied around them, the anxious flutter dropping half a register. "A pleasure. I don't believe we've spoken outside of class." "No, sir," Harry said, watching him carefully. "Something I can help you with." "I merely wondered," Quirrell said, "how you find your studies so far. Remarkable things are being said about you already. The flying incident. Your transfiguration marks." His eyes, pale and watery, fixed on Harry's with an intensity that didn't match the stammer at all. One does wonder what a boy who survived the Dark Lord's own curse might be capable of, given the right guidance. Something in the phrasing, the right guidance, delivered with a faint, testing weight, made the cold hum at the base of Harry's skull sharpen into something closer to alarm, though nothing on his face showed it. He'd learned that much from Diana, too. A warrior's face gives away exactly as much as the warrior decides to give, and no more. "I've got plenty of guidance already, sir," Harry said easily. "My mum's been pretty thorough about it." "Ah, yes," Quirrell said, something flickering behind his eyes that might have been amusement or might have been something considerably darker. "The mysterious mother. Word travels, Mr. Potter, even here. Most unusual, I understand, not the woman the world believed you belonged to. I confess I find myself rather curious what kind of blood produces a boy who can catch a falling classmate at full flying speed on his very first broomstick lesson." "Funny," Harry said. "I don't remember telling you about that." The pause that followed was very brief, less than a second, but Harry caught it, the flicker of something recalibrating behind Quirrell's watery eyes. A predator realizing its prey had noticed the shape of the trap a beat sooner than intended. "The whole school is talking about it, Mr. Potter," Quirrell said, smooth again, stammer fully returned. "And nothing so mysterious as all that. I only meant to say, a boy with gifts as unusual as yours would do well to be careful who he trusts with the full measure of them. Not everyone at this school wishes you well, whatever the newspapers say." "Good advice," Harry said. "I'll bear it in mind. Coming from you especially, sir." He said it lightly, almost cheerfully. But he watched the words land, watched Quirrell's face go very still for exactly as long as it took to process that Harry had just, quite deliberately, handed the warning back to its source. And then Harry simply nodded, unbothered, and walked past him down the corridor without waiting for a response, because he'd decided, somewhere in the last 30 seconds, that whatever game this stammering man was playing, Harry had absolutely no intention of playing it on the man's terms. He told Ron and Hermione about it that same night in the Gryffindor common room, keeping his voice low. "You think Quirrell's dangerous?" Ron said, disbelieving. "He nearly fainted when Peeves dropped a bin of ink on him in October. Fred said he screamed." "I think Quirrell's scared of something," Harry said, "and I don't think it's Peeves." "That's mad," Ron said, though without much conviction. Hermione, characteristically, had already pulled a book toward her. "There's nothing in Hogwarts, a history about a curse from Albania causing that kind of nervous condition," she said, half to herself, flipping pages. "Though that doesn't mean much, it's hardly an exhaustive source." "I'm not saying we tell anyone yet," Harry said. "I'm saying keep an eye out, that's all. I don't scare easy, but that man made the hair on the back of my neck stand up, and I've learned this year that when that happens, it's usually for a good reason." Neither of them argued with that, not really, not after the flying lesson. Not after 3 weeks of watching Harry approach every strange thing at this school with the same calm, unhurried confidence that made most other explanations seem faintly ridiculous by comparison. If Harry Potter said something felt wrong, the two of them had already learned, in the short time they'd known him, that it was worth taking seriously. The letter reached Quirrell 4 days later, delivered by an owl nobody at the school recognized, tapping at his study window well past midnight when the corridors were empty, and the portraits had mostly settled into sleep. He noticed you probing, the letter read, in the same spidery hand Diana would never see and could not have recognized if she had. That is not a failure on your part. It is confirmation of exactly what I suspected. A boy raised on Muggle cruelty for a decade does not develop the instincts he showed you tonight by accident, and neither does a boy with purely wizard blood. He is precisely what I told you he might be, and that makes him precisely as useful to our purposes as I promised. Do not approach him again directly. Subtlety is wasted on a mind that's sharp. He will simply notice it as he noticed you. Instead, watch. Learn the shape of his loyalties, the people he would move mountains to protect. Every warrior, however strong, has a soft place he has not yet learned to armor, and I suspect in this boy's case, it will not be difficult to find. Your master grows impatient for a body of his own, I understand. I may be able to help with that in time, and I will expect a great deal in return when the time comes. For now, patience. The boy is 11. We have years yet to shape how this ends, and I intend to enjoy every one of them. See Quirrell, or the thing coiled behind Quirrell's face, wearing him the way a snake wears a borrowed skin, patient and hungry, and already dreaming of the moment it would no longer need to hide. Read the letter twice by candlelight, and smiled with a mouth that wasn't entirely his own, and fed the parchment to the flame. Patience, he murmured in a voice that had none of Quirrell's stammer left in it at all, low and cold and entirely certain of itself. Yes, we have been patient a very long time already, haven't we? A little longer will cost us nothing. Somewhere in the castle above him, 3 floors up, Harry Potter slept soundly in his 4-poster bed, one hand curled loosely around the bronze bracelet on his wrist even in sleep, entirely unaware that he had just become the single most valuable piece on a board too very old. Very patient monsters had been quietly building between them for weeks, and entirely, characteristically, unafraid of what that would eventually cost him to find out. Chapter 4. What the Mirror Knows. By Halloween, Harry had stopped bothering to hide how easily most things at Hogwarts came to him, and the school had mostly stopped being surprised by it, in the specific way that people get used to a marvel once they've seen it often enough. He'd become, without particularly trying, something of a fixture in the corridors, the boy who'd caught Neville out of the air, the boy whose transfiguration marks made Hermione grind her teeth in competitive frustration even as she secretly admired them, the boy who walked past Peeves the poltergeist's usual tricks with such total unconcern that Peeves had, in a fit of pique, mostly given up bothering him. What hadn't gone away was the low, cold hum at the back of Harry's skull whenever Quirrell was in the room. If anything, it had sharpened over the weeks, a persistent wrongness that Harry had learned to simply carry, the way you carry a stone in your shoe you haven't gotten around to shaking out yet. Hermione Granger, meanwhile, had spent most of October in a slow, quiet misery that Harry, busy learning the shape of a whole new world, had somehow managed not to notice until Ron said something cruel about her in front of half the class after a charms lesson that hadn't gone her way for once. "It's no wonder no one can stand her," Ron said, loud enough to carry, as Hermione shoved past them both in the corridor with her books clutched to her chest and her eyes suspiciously bright. "She's a nightmare, honestly." "That was a bit much," Harry said once she'd gone. "Oh, come off it, you know what she's like." "I know she's swotty and a bit much sometimes," Harry said. "I also know she just heard you say nobody can stand her, right in front of her, and didn't say anything back, which means it landed. That's not the same as her deserving it." He was already turning to go after her, and Ron, looking abruptly guilty in the specific way of someone who'd enjoyed being funny for about 4 seconds before remembering that words have weight, didn't argue. He didn't find her, not that afternoon. Nobody did until dinner, when Percy Weasley came striding into the great hall with his prefect badge gleaming, and his voice pitched for maximum authority, informing the assembled students that a troll had somehow gotten into the castle, and everyone was to return to their dormitories immediately. The hall dissolved into chaos, screaming, shoving, teachers bellowing for calm that nobody was giving them, and Harry, catching Ron's arm in the crush, said the thing that had been sitting cold and certain in his gut from the moment Percy said the word troll. Hermione doesn't know. What? She's been crying in the girls' bathroom all afternoon. Everyone knows that. That's exactly the kind of thing that doesn't reach a prefect's notice in time. She has no idea there's a troll loose. Ron's face went through several rapid stages of guilt. We have to go get her. They went the wrong way against the entire tide of the school, shoving past confused Hufflepuffs and one furious Percy who bellowed after them to get back in line. And Harry, moving faster than Ron could quite keep pace with, though he throttled himself back deliberately, aware even in the panic that outrunning his best friend in a corridor full of witnesses wasn't a thing he needed to explain right now, reached the girls' bathroom just as an enormous gray shape, 12 feet of lumbering muscle and a club the size of a tree trunk, shouldered its way through the door ahead of him. He heard Hermione scream before he saw her, pressed into the corner by the sinks, completely trapped, the troll swinging its club in a slow, stupid, devastating arc toward her head. Harry did not think. He moved. He crossed the bathroom in less time than it took Ron, arriving half a step behind, to fully process what he was looking at, and caught the club, actually caught it, one hand closing around the swinging length of tree trunk inches from Hermione's skull and simply stopping it, the impact traveling up his arm and dissipating into nothing at all. No strain on his face, no give in his stance. The troll blinked at its own weapon, stuck fast in a small boy's grip, with the slow, uncomprehending confusion of a creature that had never once in its life encountered resistance. "Wrong bathroom," Harry said, and wrenched the club sideways out of the troll's hand entirely, and the creature staggered off balance, roaring in outrage. "Harry, its head, you have to hit it in the—" Ron was fumbling for his wand, shouting half-remembered advice from some book, but Harry had already dropped the club, stepped in close before the troll could recover its balance, and drove one fist, controlled, precise, exactly as hard as the situation required and not a fraction harder, the way Diana had spent 6 weeks teaching him, into the point of its jaw. The troll's head snapped sideways with a crack that echoed off the tiled walls, and it crumpled, boneless, unconscious, crashing down across 3 of the sinks with a weight that shattered porcelain in every direction. The bathroom went very quiet, except for the drip of a broken tap somewhere and Hermione's ragged breathing. "You all right?" Harry asked, turning to her, and it was such a plain, ordinary question after what had just happened that Hermione let out a startled, hiccuping laugh that was half sob. You just knocked out a troll," she said. "With your hand." "Bit of luck," Harry said, though he was smiling, unable to help it, adrenaline still bright and hot in his chest. "That was not luck, that was—" Hermione stopped, staring at him, and something in her expression shifted, cataloging, recalibrating, the way clever people do, when a piece of a puzzle they'd been quietly assembling for weeks finally clicks into a shape they hadn't quite dared believe. "How are you that strong?" Before Harry could answer, and he was, in fact, entirely prepared to answer honestly, having decided months ago that hiding what he was from his own friends served nothing, Professor McGonagall arrived in the doorway with Snape and Quirrell close behind her, wands drawn, and stopped dead at the sight of the unconscious troll sprawled across the broken sinks. What McGonagall said in a voice of controlled, dangerous calm happened here. There was a troll, Professor, Hermione said, before either boy could speak, straightening up with visible effort, and I went looking for it because I'd read about them and thought I could handle it myself, and Harry and Ron came to save me. She said it fast, fluent, clearly a lie constructed on the spot to take blame she didn't deserve. And Harry, watching her do it, watching her risk a detention to protect two boys she'd known for barely 2 months, felt something warm and startled settle in his chest that had nothing to do with the troll at all. Miss Granger, McGonagall said slowly, that was an extremely foolish thing to do. I know, Professor. 5 points will be taken from Gryffindor for your poor judgment. A pause, and her eyes moved to Harry, taking in the unconscious troll, the shattered sinks, the tree trunk club lying discarded on the floor with a dent in it that looked disturbingly like the shape of a human fist. And 10 points will be awarded to each of you, Mr. Potter, Mr. Weasley, for what was, whatever the circumstances leading to it, a genuinely remarkable piece of quick thinking under pressure. Snape said nothing at all, but his black eyes lingered on Harry, on the dent in the club, on the total absence of fear on the boy's face. For a long, calculating moment, and Quirrell, hovering pale and trembling near the door in his usual anxious hunch, watched the entire scene with an intensity that didn't match his stammer in the slightest. It was only later, walking back to the common room in a loose, exhausted knot of 3 instead of 2, that Harry told them the truth, plainly, without drama, the way Diana had taught him to own it. My mum's not what people think she is, he said. She's not really a witch. I don't fully have the words for it either, honestly, but she's older than magic as most wizards understand it, and I got some of what she is, mixed in with whatever I got from my mum Lily. That's why I'm strong. That's the whole secret, no trick to it. Ron looked for a moment like Christmas had come early. That is brilliant, he said, with the pure, uncomplicated delight of an 11-year-old learning his best friend is secretly a demigod. Wait, can you do it forever? Are you going to get even stronger? Could you beat a dragon? Probably, Harry admitted, grinning despite himself. Haven't tried yet. Hermione, characteristically, had gone very still, processing. That's not in any book, she said slowly. I've read everything the library has on magical bloodlines, and there's nothing about whatever you're describing. Gods. Actual, literal. There's a lot the library doesn't cover, apparently, Harry said. I figured, if we're going to be friends, proper friends, not just people who sit next to each other in class, you two deserve to know the whole truth rather than watching me do impossible things and wondering when I'd finally explain it. Something passed between the 3 of them in the quiet of that torchlit corridor. Not a grand declaration. Nothing that needed speeches. Just the simple, settling weight of trust freely given and received. And by the time they reached the fat lady's portrait, Ron was already peppering Harry with increasingly elaborate hypothetical questions about Amazons and gods, and whether Harry's mother had ever personally fought a dragon herself. And Hermione, despite her earlier shock, had started quietly cataloging questions of her own, in a manner that suggested she intended to hunt down every scrap of mythology the library possessed by the weekend. Diana's letters arrived every week, delivered by an owl Harry hadn't recognized until Hedwig, proprietary about the role, had chased it off twice before grudgingly accepting that this particular messenger wasn't competition. I am glad you told them, she wrote, after Harry's account of the troll and the confession that followed. I would have told you to, if you hadn't already decided it yourself. Trust given freely to people who have earned it is not weakness, and I would rather you learn that now, at 11, than spend decades the way I once did, believing my strength was something that had to be managed carefully around fragile mortal feelings. It is not. It is simply who you are, and the people worth keeping close will love you for it rather than in spite of it. I have some news of my own, which I did not want to burden you with sooner than necessary, but which I think you deserve to know plainly rather than have kept from you the way things were kept from you before. There has been movement, old movement from before your birth, connected to enemies of Themyscira I had believed dormant for a very long time. Nothing that threatens you directly, not yet, but I want you watchful, and I want you to trust the instincts I spent this summer sharpening. If something at that school feels wrong to you, it very likely is. Do not wait for permission from a teacher or a headmaster to act on that. You have never needed anyone's permission to protect yourself or the people you care about. Harry read it twice, sitting on his bed with the curtains half drawn, and thought about the cold hum at the back of his skull every time Quirrell walked into a room. He wrote back that night, "There's a teacher here. Dada professor." Something's wrong with him has been since the first week, and it's gotten stronger since Halloween, not weaker, like you'd expect if it was just nerves. I don't know what yet. Going to find out. Diana's reply came back 3 days later, shorter than usual and considerably more direct. Be careful. Not because I doubt you can handle whatever it is. I don't. Because whatever is wrong with that man may not be acting alone, and the things worth fearing in this world are rarely the ones you can simply punch. The Quidditch match against Slytherin fell on a cold, bright Saturday in November, and Harry, installed 3 weeks prior, as the youngest Seeker in a century after a tryout that had left Oliver Wood, the Gryffindor captain, nearly speechless, took to the pitch with a school-issued broom that had already, quietly, developed a reputation as one of the fastest brooms currently in circulation, though nowhere near as fast as Harry himself seemed to fly it. The match started well enough. Gryffindor's chasers found their rhythm early. The Slytherin beaters proved more vicious than skilled, and Harry hung high above the action, scanning for the snitch with the patient, unhurried focus Diana had spent a full week teaching him on that Welsh beach. The eye that waits is faster than the eye that chases. She'd told him, and he'd finally, properly, understood what she meant the moment he spotted a flicker of gold near the Slytherin goalposts and simply waited unmoving. For the perfect angle rather than diving in a panic the way most first-year Seekers would have. Then his broom bucked. It happened without warning. A sudden, violent jolt that nearly threw him from his seat, followed by a series of increasingly wild lurches that had the whole stadium gasping. The broom apparently trying with real and malicious intent to shake its own rider loose from a height that would, for anyone else, have meant a broken neck. Harry's first instinct was pure fury rather than fear. A flash of how dare you directed at an inanimate object that had clearly stopped being merely inanimate, and he clamped both hands and both knees down on the shaft of the broom with a grip that would have crushed steel, riding out a series of spins and drops that had McGonagall on her feet in the stands, and Hagrid shouting himself hoarse from the crowd, until the broom, apparently deciding brute force wasn't enough, flipped entirely upside down at 40 feet and tried to throw him off by sheer inversion. Most riders would have fallen. Harry simply hung there, upside down, gripping the broom with a strength that had it groaning under the pressure of his hands, and looked, not panicked, but genuinely curious, the way you'd look at a puzzle rather than a threat. For whatever was doing this to him, tracking lines of sight across the crowded stands with the same wordless certainty that had guided every other instinct he'd trusted all year. He found it 3 seconds later, Quirrell in the stands, eyes fixed on the broom with unblinking, unnatural concentration, lips moving in a continuous muttered incantation, while beside him Harry's gaze snagged. Snape stood equally still, staring at the same spot, and for one heart-stopping moment Harry genuinely couldn't tell which of them was responsible. He decided in the half-second that followed that it didn't matter which one it was. What mattered was breaking the connection. He let go of the broom's grip with one hand, an act that made half the stadium scream, convinced he was about to fall, and instead of falling, simply reached out and grabbed the broom's handle harder with the other, wrenching the entire shaft sideways with enough force to snap the enchanted trajectory clean. The way you'd break a rope by yanking it past its tolerance rather than fighting its pull directly. The broom shuddered, spasmed once more, and then, abruptly, as if something had lost its grip on the far end of an invisible thread, went still and obedient beneath him. Harry righted himself, hovering, breathing hard but entirely unhurt, and looked back up at the stands in time to see Quirrell's robes catch fire. It happened fast, a bloom of orange flame licking up the man's sleeve, sending him leaping backward with a shriek that was, for once, entirely genuine. And in the chaos of dousing him, nobody quite noticed that the muttering had stopped the instant the fire started, or that it had started. Hermione would tell Harry afterward with fierce satisfaction. The exact moment she'd shoved past 3 rows of Hufflepuffs to reach him, and set his robes alight herself with a hastily remembered charm, having spotted, from her seat, exactly what Harry had spotted from 40 feet in the air, down on the pitch, and entirely unrelated to any of it, because Harry, once the broom had settled, had simply resumed the patient, waiting focus Diana had taught him, unbothered by the fact that someone had just tried to kill him from the stands. He spotted the snitch again, Dove, and closed his hand around it with 3 full minutes still left in the match, ending the game so decisively that Oliver Wood picked him bodily off his broom and swung him around in a hug that nearly cracked his own ribs on Harry's shoulder, apparently forgetting in the euphoria that he was hugging someone stronger than a troll. "You just," Wood kept saying, did you see what you just saw? It fine," Harry said, grinning, still coming down off adrenaline that had nothing to do with the match itself. "Little bit more excitement than I was expecting, honestly." He found Hermione and Ron in the common room that night, having deliberately let the crowd of celebrating Gryffindors thin out before he brought up the part of the match that mattered. "It was Quirrell," Hermione said immediately, without preamble, before Harry had even fully sat down. "I saw him," Harry, muttering the whole time, not blinking once, exactly the way you'd need to for a sustained jinx. "I set his robes on fire on purpose. I'm not even sorry." "I saw him too," Harry said. "Thing is, Snape was right next to him, staring at the exact same spot the whole time. Didn't move a muscle, didn't blink either." Ron frowned. "You think it was Snape, not Quirrell?" "I think," Harry said slowly, "that I genuinely don't know which of them it was, and that bothers me more than almost anything else that's happened this term. Snape's been foul to me since day one, but foul isn't the same as murderous, and I've had a bad feeling about Quirrell since the first week that's only gotten worse." "I don't like not knowing, so we find out," Hermione said, with the brisk, decisive tone of someone who had clearly been waiting her whole life for exactly this kind of problem to sink her teeth into. "Properly. Not guessing. There's a locked corridor on the 3rd floor. Filch mentioned it to Peeves in front of us weeks ago. Something about a 3-headed dog Hagrid apparently brought in, guarding something. Dumbledore's own dog. That's not the sort of thing a school keeps around for no reason." "You think whatever Quirrell's after is behind that door?" Ron asked. "I think," Hermione said, "that it would be an extraordinary coincidence if it wasn't." Harry considered this, considered, too, the letter from Diana still folded in his trunk. The things worth fearing in this world are rarely the ones you can simply punch, and felt the same cold, deliberate certainty settle over him that had carried him through every strange thing this year had thrown at him so far. "Then we find out what's behind the door," he said. "Not to be reckless about it, I'm not planning to go looking for a fight just because I can probably win one. But if something's coming, I'd rather know its shape before it arrives than get surprised by it the way that Broom surprised me today." They found the mirror before they found the answer, which was, in its own way, more dangerous than either of them expected. It happened by accident, 3 weeks later, on a night Harry had slipped out under his father's, under James's. He still hadn't fully settled the language of it, old invisibility cloak, a Christmas gift from an anonymous sender that had arrived with no note beyond "Your father left this in my possession before he died. It is time it was returned to you. Use it well." He hadn't told Diana about the cloak yet, mostly because he suspected, correctly, that she'd have opinions about a piece of unidentified magic showing up for her son with no traceable sender. He'd meant, that night, only to explore, to walk the empty corridors and see what the castle looked like when it thought nobody was watching. And instead he found an unused classroom stacked with old desks, and in the middle of it, a tall mirror in an ornate gold frame, with an inscription running around the top that took him a moment to work out, was simply his own name reflected backward. He stepped in front of it, and the castle around him vanished from the glass entirely, replaced by a warm, sunlit room he'd never seen, and standing in it, smiling at him, alive and whole and unmistakably her, was Lily Potter. Harry's breath caught. He knew her face from the one photograph Petunia had reluctantly handed over the summer, the only image of his birth mother he'd ever owned. And here she was, moving, breathing, reaching a hand toward the glass as though she could touch him through it. Beside her stood a man with untidy black hair and glasses very like Harry's own, grinning, one hand resting warm on Lily's shoulder. James, he realized, the father who'd loved him for a year before he died, protecting a truth that wasn't even biologically his to protect. And behind them both, unmistakable even in a vision, stood Diana, not younger, not different, simply present, watching over the little family with an expression of fierce, unguarded warmth that made something crack open in Harry's chest. He stood there for what felt like hours, though it couldn't have been more than a few minutes, drinking in the sight of a family that had never once, in reality, all stood together in the same room at the same time. He was still there, tears he hadn't noticed starting drying on his face, when a voice behind him made him spin around with his wand half raised before he'd consciously decided to draw. "Ah," said Dumbledore, stepping out of the shadows near the door, looking entirely unsurprised to find him there. "The Mirror of Erist. I rather thought someone might find their way here eventually, though I confess I expected it to take longer." "What is it?" Harry asked, voice rough. "It shows us nothing more or less than the deepest, most desperate desire of our hearts," Dumbledore said, settling himself onto one of the stacked desks with the unhurried air of a man who'd had this exact conversation before, with other students in other years. "Not what is. What we wish most fiercely could be. It has driven men mad, wasting away in front of it, unable to accept that the image can never become real." "I know it's not real," Harry said. "I'm not stupid, I just—" He stopped, and Dumbledore mercifully didn't push, simply waited, the way Diana had taught Harry silence sometimes needed to be waded through rather than filled. "I never got to have that," Harry said eventually. "All three of them, together. Loving me without it being complicated by which one's really my family, or whether James would have minded, or whether Diana ever got to hold me as a baby before everything went wrong. I just wanted to see it, even knowing it's not real. That is, I think, the most honest thing anyone has ever said to me in front of this mirror," Dumbledore said quietly. "Most who find it want power, or wealth, or the return of something they've lost through cruelty rather than circumstance. You wanted a family whole. I find that rather less dangerous than most desires, though I would still counsel you not to return here too often. The mirror does not give false hope. It gives no hope at all, only a beautiful, unmoving lie, and dwelling in lies, however beautiful, has a way of hollowing a person out from the inside if they let it." Harry nodded, throat tight, and didn't argue. "I will be moving it tomorrow," Dumbledore said, rising. "Somewhere rather less accessible than this. Not as punishment, Harry, simply as kindness. Go to bed. And for what it's worth, for whatever small comfort an old man's opinion is worth, I think the family in that mirror would be, all three of them, exceptionally proud of the boy standing in front of it tonight." It was Hagrid 3 days later, over tea in his cabin that Harry, Ron, and Hermione had taken to visiting on weekends, who let slip, clumsily, guiltily, the moment the words left his mouth, the piece that made the whole shape of the puzzle click. "Course, security's tight as anything down there," he said, in response to a carefully offhand question from Hermione about the third-floor corridor. "Dumbledore's arranged it personal. Professor Sprout's got Devil's Snare down, Flitwick's charmed a key puzzle, McGonagall's transfigured a chess set that'll flatten ye if ye play it wrong, and Snape's brewed up a potion riddle that focks anyone who didn't think it through proper. And then there's Fluffy. That's my Cerberus, lovely temperament once ye play him a bit o' music, and after him, well." He caught himself going pale. "Forget I said that last bit. After him what, Hagrid?" Harry asked gently, and Hagrid, who had never once in his life successfully kept a secret from anyone who asked twice, cracked within about 4 seconds. "After him, it's just Dumbledore's own protection, and I'm not saying another word about that, and neither should any o' you go anywhere near that corridor, understand?" "What's it protecting, Hagrid?" Hermione pressed. "Summat between Dumbledore and a chap called Nicholas Flamel," Hagrid said, and then, watching all three faces go carefully, deliberately blank in the specific way of children filing a name away for later research, added with real alarm, "And that is all I'm saying, and I want ye to promise me you'll leave it be." They promised. None of them meant it, and Hagrid, watching them go, looked like he already knew as much. The name Nicholas Flamel took Hermione 4 days to run down in the library, buried in an old book on famous alchemists that nobody had checked out in over a decade. And when she found it, she read the relevant passage out loud to Harry and Ron in a corner of the common room in a whisper that shook with the weight of what she'd uncovered. "The only known creator of the Philosopher's Stone," she read, "a substance capable of transforming any metal into pure gold. It also produces the elixir of life, which will make the drinker immortal. There have been many reports of the Philosopher's Stone over the centuries, but the only stone currently in existence belongs to Mr. Nicholas Flamel, the noted alchemist, who last year celebrated his 665th birthday." "Immortality," Ron said, very quietly. "That's what's down there. That's what Quirrell wants." "That's what someone wants," Harry corrected, "and I still don't know for certain whether that someone is Quirrell working alone or Quirrell working for someone else entirely. There's a version of this where he's not even the dangerous one, just the frightened man carrying something dangerous inside him." Hermione stared at him. "How do you know that? Or do you actually know it, or is that a guess?" "Half instinct," Harry admitted. "That cold feeling I told you about near him, it's never felt like it comes from Quirrell himself. It's like there's something else in the room whenever he is, wearing him the way you'd wear a coat that doesn't quite fit." He hadn't said this out loud before, not even to himself in those exact words, and saying it now made his own skin crawl a little. "That's completely mad," Ron said, though he didn't sound like he doubted it. "I know," Harry agreed. "I'm going to write my mum about it tonight, and then whatever she says." He looked between the two of them, weighing it, and made the decision the way Diana had taught him to make every decision that mattered. Clearly, without flinching from the size of it, "I think we need to be ready to go down there ourselves if it comes to it. Not looking for trouble. But if that stone's the reason a curse-wrapped man is jinxing brooms and staring at me in every corridor, I'd rather meet whatever's coming on my own terms than wait for it to catch me by surprise." Diana's reply arrived 2 days later, and it was longer than any letter she'd sent all term. I have made inquiries, she wrote. An immortality stone, hoarded by a 600-year-old alchemist, guarded by a headmaster who has already once badly misjudged a threat close to you. This has the shape of something old trying to claw its way back into power through the one door left open to it. I do not yet know for certain who or what is behind Quirrell, but the description you gave me, the cold, the sense of a second thing wearing a man's face, matches things I have read about and fought in ages your history books do not cover. Spirits that refuse the natural boundary of death. If that is what this is, then it is not, strictly, something you can simply outmuscle the way you handled that troll. Cunning matters here as much as strength. I want you to promise me something, and I want you to actually mean it rather than simply telling me what I want to hear. If this comes to a confrontation, you do not go in blind, and you do not go in alone unless there is truly no other choice. Bring your friends if you trust them. Bring a plan if you can manage one, and remember what I taught you about restraint being its own form of power. It will matter more here than it ever has before, because whatever wears that man's face has had far longer than you to learn patience. And patience, wielded by something that old, is a weapon in its own right. I am not there to stand beside you for this one, and that eats at me more than I can easily put into words. But I have watched you all term through every letter you've sent me, and I do not for one single moment doubt that you can meet whatever this is and come out the other side of it. Trust what I taught you. Trust your own instincts, which have not once been wrong all year. And Harry, if it truly comes to it, do not hold back out of some misplaced fear of what your strength might do. Hold back only where precision demands it. Everywhere else, be exactly as strong as you actually are. Harry read the letter 3 times, folded it carefully, and tucked it into his trunk beside the first one she'd ever sent him, and went to find Ron and Hermione with the settled, quiet certainty of someone who had just been handed, in as many words as his mother could manage across an ocean of distance and worry, permission to be exactly what he already was. The confrontation, when it came, sooner than any of them expected, on a night in early June when Hagrid let slip that the dragon he'd been secretly keeping had finally been sent away, and in the relief of the conversation, mentioned offhand that he'd told a hooded stranger in the Hog's Head exactly how to get past Fluffy in exchange for the dragon egg months earlier, would prove Diana right about nearly everything she'd warned him of. But that confrontation, and the shape of the thing wearing Quirrell's face, and the letter with the initial C that Harry would not learn the meaning of for a long while yet, belonged to a different night, and a different kind of courage than punching a troll. For now, Harry folded the letter away, looked at his 2 best friends across the firelit common room, and said simply, "Right. Let's figure out how we're getting past a 3-headed dog." Chapter 5. The Vindication of Cersei. They went down through the trapdoor on the same night Hagrid let slip about the dragon egg, because there wasn't time to wait for a better one. Dumbledore had been called away from the school entirely. An urgent message from the ministry that Hermione, checking the Owl Post logs out of pure nosy thoroughness, discovered had come from an address that didn't exist anywhere in the ministry's public directory. "It's a trap," she said, flat and certain, standing in the 3rd-floor corridor with her wand already out. "Someone wanted him gone tonight specifically. That means tonight's the night." "Then we go tonight," Harry said, and didn't ask either of them to stay behind, because he'd decided months ago that pretending his friends were too fragile to choose their own risks was its own kind of insult, and Ron and Hermione had made abundantly clear, in a dozen small ways since the troll, that they had no intention of being protected from the outside of a story they'd already earned a place inside. Fluffy, the 3-headed dog, was already unconscious when they arrived, sprawled across the trapdoor's threshold, snoring in a slow, 3-part rumble, a discarded harp lying nearby that told its own story clearly enough. "Someone got here first," Ron said, unnecessarily. Harry knelt, hauled the door open. It required considerably less effort than it should have. Hinges groaning under a strength he no longer bothered to soften around his friends, and dropped through into the dark below, landing lightly on what turned out to be a thick tangle of vines that immediately began, with slow, deliberate malice, wrapping themselves around his legs. "Devil's snare," Hermione called down, dropping after him with Ron close behind. "Don't struggle, it feeds on movement, you have to relax." Harry, who had exactly zero intention of waiting patiently for a plant to decide whether to strangle him, simply reached down and tore the vines off his legs with both hands, roots and all, in a motion that had nothing relaxed about it and worked considerably faster than Hermione's careful advice anyway. "Or you could just do that," Hermione said faintly, landing beside him. "Sorry, should have mentioned that was an option." The flying keys came next, a chamber full of winged, jewel-bright keys swirling above a locked door. One of them the correct match for the lock, and the rest apparently enchanted to actively resist capture. Ron, spotting a trio of broomsticks propped against the wall, made straight for one, clearly intending a proper chase. Harry didn't bother with a broom. He simply leapt, a jump that carried him 15 feet into the swirling cloud of keys, hovering there for a heartbeat at the top of his arc, while the enchanted things scattered in what could only be described as alarm, snatched the correct key out of the air on his way back down by some instinct he couldn't have explained even to himself, and landed neatly, key in hand, while Ron was still fumbling his broomstick off the wall. "Show off," Ron said, grinning despite himself. "Didn't want to wait around," Harry said, unlocking the door. The chest chamber slowed them properly for the first time. A full-sized wizard's chest set spanning the whole floor, black and white pieces carved from stone standing twice a man's height, and the immediate obvious understanding that they'd have to play it through rather than simply barrel across. "I'll take Ron's spot as a knight," Harry offered, already moving toward one of the empty squares. "No," Ron said, with sudden, fierce authority that surprised even himself. "This is a chess match, and chess is the one thing in this whole castle I'm actually properly good at. Let me play it. You lot follow my lead." Harry looked at him for a moment, at the sudden steel in a boy who spent most of his time being overshadowed by 5 older brothers and one very famous best friend, and simply nodded, stepping back. "Your call. I'll trust it." It took nearly 15 minutes, brutal and tense, stone pieces smashing into rubble as they were taken, until Ron, with a grim, resolved expression that made him look considerably older than 11, sacrificed himself into checkmate on purpose, letting the White Queen's stone fist crack across his own knightpiece and send him sprawling, unconscious, across the board, to open the final path for Harry and Hermione. Harry checked him over first, hands quick and gentle despite the strength coiled in them, found a pulse, steady and breathing evening out. "He's alive, knocked out cold, that's all." He looked up at Hermione. "You should stay with him." "No," Hermione said, echoing Ron's own refusal a few minutes earlier, jaw set. "I'm not staying behind while you go on alone. Whatever's ahead, you'll need someone who's actually read the theory, even if you can just punch your way past most of it." They left Ron propped against the wall and pressed on. The potion riddle room stopped them for barely 2 minutes. Hermione worked through Snape's logic puzzle with the fierce, focused efficiency of someone finally given a problem that couldn't be solved with muscle, identifying the correct bottle from a line of 7 identical ones through pure deduction, and held it up with grim satisfaction. "This one takes you forward. This one takes you back." She looked at the tiny amount of liquid remaining in the forward bottle, barely enough for one swallow. "There's not enough for both of us." "Then you go back," Harry said immediately. "Get Ron, get help if you can find any. I'll go on." "Harry, I mean it," he said, and something in his voice, not commanding, just plainly, calmly certain, made her stop arguing. "Whatever's through there, I need to know you and Ron are safe more than I need company for the last bit. That's not me being noble, that's just true. Hermione looked at him for a long moment and then, unexpectedly, threw her arms around him in a fierce, brief hug. Be careful, she said. Actually careful, not just confident. There's a difference, and I think you sometimes forget that. I'll remember, Harry said, and meant it, and drank the tiny remaining potion, feeling the cold flame of it sweep through him as the black fire guarding the way forward parted around him like a curtain. The final chamber was empty except for a single mirror, standing tall and silent in the center of the room, and a man in a purple turban standing in front of it with his back to the door. I wondered if it would be you, Quirrell said, without turning around, and the stammer was entirely gone now, his voice flat, cold, and precise. Dumbledore's ministry summons should have kept him occupied at least another hour. I confess I did not expect to be interrupted quite this soon, though I suppose, given everything I've observed about you this year, Mr. Potter, I should have accounted for the possibility. Where's the stone? Harry asked, staying near the door, unhurried, cataloging the room the way Diana had taught him, exits, distances, anything that could be turned into a weapon or a shield in the half-second it might be needed. In this mirror, Quirrell said. Or rather, the knowledge of how to retrieve it is. A clever bit of enchantment on Dumbledore's part. Only someone who wishes to find the stone, rather than simply use it, can retrieve it from the glass. I have been standing here for the better part of 20 minutes trying to make myself want the wrong thing convincingly enough to fool it, and finding the exercise rather more difficult than I anticipated. Sounds like a problem, Harry said. Guess you should give up then. Quirrell laughed, a short, humorless sound, and finally turned around, and Harry's stomach dropped, just slightly, at the sight of the man's face up close. Gaunt, hollowed, eyes bloodshot in a way that spoke of exhaustion carried far past the point most bodies could survive. You are remarkably calm, Quirrell observed, for a boy standing in a room alone with the man who has spent the entire year trying, in various small ways, to kill you. I noticed the broom thing, Harry said. Figured it was you. Or Snape. Turns out it was you setting yourself on fire trying to jinx me, which, honestly, feels like it should have told you something. Something flickered across Quirrell's ruined face, genuine, startled offense. And then from behind him, without Quirrell moving to unwrap it himself, the purple turban began, slowly, horribly, to unravel on its own. Let me speak to him, said a second voice, thin and hissing, emerging from behind Quirrell's skull as he turned his back to Harry once more. And Harry watched, with a cold, clenched stillness that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with pure, focused attention, as Quirrell's turban fell away entirely, revealing on the back of his head a face that shouldn't have been able to exist at all, pale, snake-slitted, red-eyed. Stretched across the back of a human skull like something wearing a man from the inside out. Harry Potter, said Lord Voldemort, in a voice that carried decades of hatred compressed into 2 words. We meet again, though you will not remember the first time. How I have longed to see the boy who ended me 11 years ago with nothing more than his mother's foolish love. It wasn't just my mother's love, apparently, Harry said, refusing to let his voice shake, though something cold had settled deep in his chest at the sight of that face. Turns out there's more to me than that. Might want to ask your friend with the letters about it, assuming you've got one. Voldemort's slitted eyes narrowed sharp with a fury that Harry's plain, unbothered defiance had clearly not been expected to provoke. You know about her, he said, and it wasn't quite a question. Not much, Harry admitted. Just that someone's been whispering in your ear all year, feeding you things you couldn't have known on your own. Figured that out around Christmas. Didn't much matter who until right now, watching your face do that. Clever, Voldemort said, and there was something almost admiring buried in the venom of it. Cleverer than your father, certainly. I remember him, begging at the end for his son's life instead of his own. Pathetic. Your mother, at least, had the courage to simply stand in the way. And now here you stand, carrying some ridiculous inheritance of ancient blood that has made you strong enough to no-sell curses that would have killed any other child outright, and you think that makes you my equal. Didn't say that, Harry said. Just said I'm not scared of you. Those aren't the same thing. They should be, Voldemort hissed, and Quirrell's body lunged. It happened fast, Quirrell's hand snapping out toward Harry's throat with a speed that shouldn't have been possible for a man in his condition, driven by whatever dark strength Voldemort's spirit lent the failing body it wore. But Harry had spent 6 weeks on a Welsh beach learning precisely how fast actually was, and he caught the reaching hand in midair, one-handed, and simply held it there immobile, no strain visible anywhere in his stance. Quirrell's eyes, his own eyes, not Voldemort's, wide with a fear that hadn't fully belonged to the dark wizard riding him, went round with shock. That is not possible, Voldemort's voice snarled from the back of the skull as Harry held the arm perfectly still with what looked, to anyone watching, like no effort at all. You keep saying that, Harry said. Might want to update your information. He didn't crush the hand. He thought about it, thought briefly and clearly, about exactly how easy it would be, about the man who'd murdered his mother standing an arm's length away and utterly unable to break a single-handed grip. And then, deliberately, precisely, he simply shoved, pushing Quirrell backward and releasing the arm in the same motion, sending the man staggering 3 full steps into the mirror's frame, because Diana's voice was in his head as clearly as if she stood beside him. Restraint is its own form of power. He didn't need to break anything to prove a point that had already, plainly, landed. Quirrell recovered his footing, breathing hard, and Voldemort's voice, from behind his skull, had gone quiet and calculating in a way that worried Harry considerably more than the shouting had. There is another way, Voldemort said, softer now. You needn't be my enemy at all, boy. Blood such as yours, joined to power such as mine, think what we could build together, rather than wasting it on a school full of children who will forget your name the moment a newer marvel arrives to distract them. Not interested, Harry said flat. You haven't even considered it. Don't need to, Harry said. You killed my mum. You've spent this whole year trying to kill me. And even if none of that were true, I've met exactly one person all year who offered me power like it was the whole point of existing. And it was you, right now. And that alone tells me everything I need to know about what you'd actually do with me once you got what you wanted. Something behind Quirrell's skull hissed, low and furious. And then, abruptly, without further warning, Quirrell's whole body twisted, hand darting not toward Harry this time but toward the mirror, and Harry understood, a half-second too late to prevent it entirely, that the distraction of conversation had been exactly that. A distraction, while whatever spell Voldemort had finally managed to force through Quirrell's desperate, straining will completed itself in the glass. The stone dropped from the mirror's surface into Quirrell's waiting palm, small and blood-red, and Voldemort's laugh, thin, triumphant, utterly without warmth, filled the chamber. You talk a great deal for someone who has just lost, he said. Harry didn't answer with words. He crossed the distance between them in a single stride and closed his hand around Quirrell's wrist, and this time he didn't hold back at all, not to injure but to take, wrenching the stone free of the man's grip with a force that snapped bone audibly, Quirrell's scream tearing through the chamber, and the stone clattered to the floor between them. Kill him, Voldemort snarled, all pretense of civility gone entirely. Kill him now, you fool, or I will make what remains of your life considerably shorter than what little of it I've already stolen from you. Quirrell, weeping now, one hand cradling the shattered wrist, lunged for Harry anyway, driven, plainly, by pure terror of the thing riding him rather than any conviction of his own. And Harry, done with restraint the moment the man reached for him bare-handed with clear intent to strangle, caught him by the collar and simply touched him. It shouldn't have done anything. It was barely more than a grip, but the moment Harry's skin made contact with Quirrell's, the man screamed in a register that had nothing human left in it at all, and where Harry's hand touched him, flesh began to blister and smoke, an old, ancient magic in Harry's own blood recoiling violently from whatever unnatural thing was housed behind that ruined face, punishing the contact the way sunlight punishes rock. Quirrell staggered backward, shrieking, clawing at his own collar and Voldemort's spirit, sensing plainly that its vessel was failing faster than expected, tore itself free of the dying man's body in a boiling rush of black smoke that poured out through Quirrell's mouth and nose and eyes, leaving the body to collapse, empty and finally still, on the stone floor. The smoke gathered itself briefly into something almost man-shaped, hovering in the center of the chamber, and Voldemort's voice, thinner now, stripped of its borrowed vessel, reduced to something closer to a whisper carried on wind, hissed one last thing before the shape scattered entirely, fleeing through a crack in the ancient stonework too narrow for anything solid to follow. "This is not finished, boy. Not nearly." Then it was gone, and the chamber was silent except for Harry's own ragged breathing, and the small, ugly sound of the stone rolling to a stop against the mirror's base. He picked up the stone with hands that had stopped shaking only because he'd made a deliberate decision not to let them, and looked down at Quirrell's body, a man who had, in the end, been a victim as much as a villain, hollowed out and worn like a coat by something far crueler than he'd ever been himself, and felt, for the first time all night, something that wasn't fury or focus but simple, tired grief. "You didn't deserve that," he said quietly, to a man who couldn't hear him anymore. "Whatever you did this year, you didn't deserve to end up like this." He was still crouched there when a voice, low and amused and entirely unfamiliar, spoke from the doorway. "How very generous of you," the voice said, "to mourn the man who spent a year trying to murder you." Harry rose, turning, stone still clutched in one fist, and found himself looking at a woman who had not been there a moment ago, tall, dark-haired, dressed in robes the deep green-black of a starless sea, standing in the doorway with the easy, unhurried confidence of someone who had never once in her long life needed to fear walking into any room, however dangerous. "Who are you?" Harry asked, though something cold and certain in his gut had already started answering the question before she did. "I have been called many names," the woman said, drifting further into the chamber, eyes moving with clinical interest between the empty husk of Quirrell's body and the boy standing over it. "Kirk, once, a very long time ago. Cersei, more recently, in the mangled version your storytellers prefer. I signed my letters to your unfortunate professor with a single letter, mostly for my own amusement. I did enjoy imagining how long it would take clever little Miss Granger to work out who C was. I don't imagine she managed it. Most don't." Harry's grip on the stone tightened. "You're the one who's been feeding him information all year." "Feeding him a great many things," Cersei agreed. "Voldemort was never especially subtle, but he was useful, hungry enough to be guided, proud enough not to notice he was being guided at all. A pity his little ritual with your blood tonight failed so spectacularly. I did rather hope the stone would give him a body sturdy enough to be worth continuing to invest in." She tilted her head, studying Harry with an intensity that made the hair on his neck stand up in a way nothing all year had quite managed, not even Voldemort. "But I confess, watching you handle him just now, I find I'm considerably more interested in you than I ever was in him." "Why?" Harry asked, though he suspected, with a sinking certainty, that he already knew part of the answer. "Because your mother," Cersei said, "is the single greatest disappointment of my very long life, and you, little demigod, are the crack in her perfect armor that I have been waiting 2,000 years to find." Something in the way she said it, not with the cartoonish menace of a villain announcing a plan, but with the flat, wounded conviction of someone reciting a grievance she'd nursed so long it had become part of her bones, made Harry go very still. "What did she ever do to you?" "She exists," Cersei said simply. "She and the whole rotted, self-congratulating island that made her. Do you know what Themyscira did to me, boy? I fought beside them once, in an age before your history books bother to remember, and when I chose to seek power on my own terms rather than accept the scraps of it the gods deigned to hand down to obedient women, they cast me out as a monster. Not because I did anything they themselves hadn't done in smaller, meeker doses. Because I refused to pretend the doing of it was shameful. Because I would not smile and call myself grateful for the leash." Her voice had gone hard, brittle at the edges, old fury polished smooth by centuries of repetition. "Your mother is the newest jewel of that same rotted island. The gods adore her, the mortals worship her, and in 2,000 years not one crack has ever shown in that perfect, insufferable armor until she made you and abandoned you in a cupboard for a decade. And I finally found the one flaw that island's precious ideals could never quite paper over." "She didn't abandon me," Harry said, and his voice had gone dangerously quiet. "She didn't know. And the second she found out, she came and got me herself, tore the door off its hinges to do it." "Yes," Cersei said, and smiled, slow and satisfied, like a woman laying down a winning hand of cards. "She did. 11 years too late, and only after her precious ideals had already cost you a childhood. That is the crack, little demigod. Not that she failed to love you. That her whole beautiful, sanctimonious island failed to notice you, for a decade, while a small boy slept in a cupboard believing his own nature was something to be ashamed of. I intend to make certain the whole world knows it. What better vindication, after 2,000 years of exile, than proving Themyscira's flawless daughter has a flaw the size of an abandoned son?" Harry felt the anger rising in him, hot and immediate, and forced himself deliberately to breathe through it the way Diana had taught him. "Anger makes you predictable, and predictable is how you lose." "You want to hurt her," he said slowly, working it through. "Not me. Me's just the tool. You want to break something in her, and you picked me because you think I'm the softest place to do it." "How refreshingly perceptive," Cersei said. "Most demigods your age are still working out which end of the sword to hold." "I'm not soft," Harry said, "and I'm not a tool. And whatever your problem is with Themyscira, that's between you and them. Leave my mum out of it." "Oh, I fully intend to leave her out of it," Cersei said, and something in the way she said it made Harry's blood run cold before she'd even finished the sentence. "Right up until the exact moment it will hurt her most to discover she wasn't. That is, after all, the entire elegance of the plan, boy, not to fight Diana of Themyscira on a battlefield, where she has spent 3,000 years becoming annoyingly difficult to defeat. Simply to take her son, quietly, patiently, and shape him into something she cannot look at without seeing her own perfect ideals rot from the inside out." "You think you can shape me," Harry said, and there was something in his voice now that wasn't quite anger anymore, something colder, steadier, the voice of a boy who had spent a whole year learning exactly how little he had left to be afraid of. "You've watched me for what, a few months through a professor's letters. You don't know me at all." "I know more than you think," Cersei said. "I know you grew up starved of love and are therefore hungrier for it than you'll ever admit out loud. I know you've spent this whole year proving your strength to everyone around you, which tells me you still, somewhere underneath all that confidence, doubt whether it's truly yours to keep. And I know, this part especially, that you have never once in 11 years of life faced someone who could actually match you, and that when you finally do, boy, it is going to shake something loose in you that I intend to be there patiently to catch." Harry didn't answer immediately. Some part of what she'd said had landed harder than he wanted to admit, and he suspected from the small, satisfied curve of her mouth that she knew it too. "You're wrong about one thing," he said finally. "Enlighten me." "You said nobody's ever matched me." He tightened his grip on the philosopher's stone, feeling the strange, cool weight of it in his palm. You haven't tried yet. Want to? Something flickered across Cersei's face, surprise, genuine and unguarded, quickly smothered under amusement. Bold, she said. Very bold for a boy who watched a possessed man's flesh smoke at his touch not 10 minutes ago and hasn't fully worked out yet what that means about the limits of his own power. Bold's worked out pretty well for me so far, Harry said. It has, Cersei agreed. It has indeed. Which is precisely why I have no intention of fighting you tonight. In a chamber this small, with your friends bleeding somewhere in the corridors above us, and your headmaster, no doubt, already racing back toward the castle at considerable speed. I did not survive 2,000 years by picking fights on terms that favor my opponent. She turned, unhurried, toward the door. No, tonight I simply wanted to look at you properly, little demigod, and to let you know precisely who has been watching you all year and why. Consider it a courtesy. I find warnings so much more satisfying than ambushes when there's time to spare for them. My mum's going to hear about this, Harry said. Every word. I sincerely hope so, Cersei said, pausing at the threshold, glancing back with an expression that had gone, briefly, almost gentle, the expression of someone looking at an old wound she'd waited a very long time to finally reopen. Tell her exactly what I said. Tell her I found her son in a cupboard grown strong despite her, not because of her, and that I intend to be the one who finally teaches him what to do with that strength, properly, without her careful island morality softening every lesson into something safe. Tell her the crack has already begun, and that watching her try to close it again is going to be the single greatest pleasure of the remainder of my very long life. She was gone before Harry could answer, not through the door, not through any visible exit at all, simply gone, the space where she'd stood empty and cold, and Harry stood alone in the ruined chamber with a dead man's body at his feet and a stone in his hand, and a fury building in his chest that he did not, for the first time all year, entirely know how to master. Dumbledore found him there 20 minutes later, having raced back from a ministry summons that had, indeed, turned out to be entirely fabricated, and took in the scene, Quirrell's body, the stone, the boy standing very still in the middle of it all with an expression that had aged years in a single night, with the grave, careful attention of a man cataloging exactly how badly things had nearly gone. "Harry," he said gently, "are you hurt?" "No," Harry said. Then, after a pause, "Not the way you mean, anyway." Dumbledore's eyes sharpened. "What happened here?" Harry told him, all of it plainly, without softening any part. The way Diana had taught him truth was owed even when it cost something to give it. Quirrell's death, Voldemort's spirit fleeing, and last, the woman who had walked into the chamber like she owned it, and everything she'd said about Diana, about Themyscira, about 2,000 years of exile finally finding somewhere to land. Dumbledore listened without interrupting, and when Harry finished, the old man was quiet for a long time, his face graver than Harry had ever seen it. "Cersei," Dumbledore said finally, almost to himself, "I had wondered this past year whether an intelligence beyond Voldemort's own was guiding some of his choices. He was never, in his previous incarnation, a subtle man, and subtlety has marked several strange decisions he's made this year. I did not imagine the answer would reach quite this far back, or connect quite this directly to you." He looked at Harry with something that mingled real sorrow and real respect in equal measure. "I am sorry, Harry. This is not a threat I anticipated, and I fear it may prove considerably more dangerous than the one you just survived." "I'm not scared of her," Harry said, and it came out rougher than he meant it to, raw at the edges. I don't like that she's right about some of it. That's what's getting to me, not the threats. The bits that were true. The bits that are true," Dumbledore said quietly, "are true because your mother, both of them, made mistakes born of circumstance and misplaced trust, not because either of them failed to love you. Cersei deals in half-truths precisely because whole lies are so much easier to see through. Do not mistake her skill at finding a wound for proof that the wound defines you. Harry nodded, not fully convinced yet but willing to carry the words with him anyway. I need to write my mum, he said. Tonight, before anything else. I would expect nothing less, Dumbledore said. And Harry, for what it's worth, whatever comes of this, you did not fail tonight. You stopped Voldemort from gaining the stone. You survived a confrontation that has killed far more experienced wizards, and you refused an offer of shared power that has tempted better men than either of us. That is not nothing. That is, in fact, rather a great deal. Harry's letter to Diana went out that same night, longer and rower than any he'd written all year, carrying every word Cersei had said without softening a single one of them, because he'd decided, holding the quill over the parchment in the flickering candlelight of the empty dormitory, that whatever pain the truth cost his mother, it would cost her far less than a lie designed to spare her feelings. And because some old, hard-won conviction in him understood with total certainty that Diana would want the whole shape of the threat laid, bare rather than managed on her behalf. Her reply, when it came 2 days later, was short, shorter than any letter she'd sent all year, and it arrived not by owl but by Diana herself, appearing at the gates of Hogwarts at dawn with an expression that made the stone gargoyles themselves seem to lean back a fraction, asking to see her son and the headmaster both, immediately, and making abundantly, unmistakably clear that she had no intention of waiting for an appointment to be arranged. Cersei, she said, the moment Harry reached her, before either of them had said anything else at all, her voice carrying 2,000 years of old, banked fury finally given a fresh target to burn toward. Of course it's her. I should have known the moment you described that cold feeling near your professor. I simply didn't want to believe she'd finally found a crack worth exploiting after all this time. She took Harry's face in both hands, checking him over with the fierce, wordless thoroughness of a mother confirming with her own eyes that a threat had truly passed him by unscathed, and then quieter, rower. I am so sorry. I should have told you about her from the start, the moment I felt the ripple of magic the night you were born. I let old caution cost you a warning you deserve to have. It's all right, Harry said. I handled it. You handled Voldemort, Diana said. Cersei is not Voldemort. Voldemort is hunger and cruelty wearing ambition as a disguise, dangerous, but simple in the end, to understand once you've seen the shape of it. Cersei has spent 2,000 years perfecting patience, cunning, and the particular art of making her enemies do her work for her without ever realizing they've been maneuvered into it. She did not come to that chamber to fight you, Harry. She came to look at you, and to plant a seed, and I promise you, whatever she said in that room has already started growing roots you haven't noticed yet. Harry thought of the words that had lodged in his chest and refused to shift since that night. You still doubt whether your strength is truly yours to keep, and said nothing, which told Diana, watching his face carefully, everything she needed to know. We're going to deal with this together, she said, firm, final, brooking no argument. Not letters across an ocean. Together. Whatever she's planning next, she is not getting anywhere near you without going through me first, and I promise you, little one, after 2,000 years of waiting for exactly this fight, I am more than ready to give her one. Chapter 6. The Amazon's Son. Diana didn't leave the school after that first dawn conversation. She simply stayed, took up residence, without asking anyone's permission, in a guest chamber near the Gryffindor Tower that the castle itself seemed to conjure into existence out of sheer respect for her presence, and made it plain to every professor who raised an eyebrow that she had no intention of being managed, redirected, or politely dismissed, while her son remained inside walls that a 2,000-year-old sorceress had already once slipped past unnoticed. You cannot simply install yourself at a school of magic you have no formal standing at. Professor McGonagall told her on the second morning, not unkindly, more out of genuine bureaucratic bewilderment than any real objection. I have exactly as much standing as I choose to claim, Diana said, and I have chosen to claim quite a lot of it. If that troubles the school's paperwork, I am happy to discuss it with whoever handles paperwork, once my son's safety is no longer in question. McGonagall, after a long moment studying the utter, immovable calm behind the statement, had simply nodded and gone to inform the other staff that arrangements would be made. The last 3 weeks of term passed strangely. For Harry, caught between the ordinary rhythms of exams and Quidditch celebrations, and the low, constant hum of waiting for the other half of Circe's promise to arrive. He studied for his final exams with Hermione, drilling him relentlessly on wand movements he barely needed, but respected enough to learn properly anyway. And he trained in the evenings with Diana on the grounds behind the greenhouses, where Professor Sprout had quietly agreed to look the other way about the scorched patches of earth that kept appearing. "She won't come at you directly," Diana said, one evening, circling him slowly with her hands loose and ready, testing the guard he'd built up over the last few months against attacks considerably faster and older than anything Hogwarts had thrown at him. "Not yet. She is still deciding what kind of confrontation serves her purpose best, a quiet one, where she can shape you unseen, or a loud one, where the whole world watches Themyscira's champion lose something that matters." "Which do you think she'll pick?" "I think," Diana said, feinting left and driving in low, a strike Harry caught on his forearm with a grunt rather than his usual effortless block, "that Circe has spent 2,000 years being erased from history by people who preferred to pretend she never mattered. I think she wants an audience this time. I think she wants the world to see exactly what she's capable of, not just feel the consequences of it in private. So a public fight." "Eventually," Diana agreed, "which means we have time to prepare but not endless time, and not the luxury of assuming she'll wait for us to be ready." She swept his legs, sent him sprawling onto the grass, and offered a hand to pull him back up with the faint, proud smile she always wore when he took a hard fall without flinching from the next one. Again. The letter arrived on the last morning of term, delivered not by owl but by a raven with feathers so black they seemed to swallow light, dropped directly onto the breakfast table in front of Harry with a theatrical flourish that made half the great hall turn to stare. He opened it in front of Diana, Ron, and Hermione, all three leaning in without pretense of subtlety. "Little Demigod," it read in that same spidery hand. "I have decided, after some consideration, that a quiet unraveling would be wasted on you. You are far too interesting a subject for a private lesson learned in shadows. So, tonight, at the standing stones on the hill above the village they call Little Hangleton, I will be waiting. Bring your mother if she is brave enough to come, though I suspect she will insist regardless. Bring your friends, too. If you wish an audience of your own, I have no objection to witnesses. What I want from you, Harry, is simple, and I think you already suspect what it is. Proof, delivered in front of the woman who made you and then left you to raise yourself, that her ideals were always a lie dressed up as virtue. Come alone if you're afraid to bring her. Come with her if you're not. Either way, I will be there, and either way, by morning, the world will know something true about the Themyscira that it has spent 3,000 years refusing to see." See, the hall had gone very quiet around them by the time Harry finished reading. Word of the raven and its unnatural feathers having rippled outward faster than any conversation could keep pace with. "Little Hangleton," Dumbledore said, arriving at Harry's shoulder without any of them noticing his approach, having read the letter over Harry's arm with grave, careful attention. "That name is not unfamiliar to me. It is, if my research into Voldemort's past serves correctly, the village nearest the estate where Tom Riddle's father lived, and where, I believe, a rather significant portion of the young Voldemort's early rage was born. She's tying it together, Hermione said slowly. Voldemort's history and whatever she wants with Harry, making it symbolic. She likes symbolism, Diana said, voice flat and grim, folding the letter closed with a precision that suggested she'd rather have crushed it entirely. It's one of her oldest habits. Everything she does has to mean something larger than the act itself, or she considers it beneath her. We're not going, Ron said immediately. It's obviously a trap. Of course it's a trap, Diana agreed. That was never in question. The only real question is whether we walk into it on her terms, unprepared, or on ours, having decided in advance exactly how it's going to end. She looked at Harry, weighing something. This is your fight as much as mine, little one. I won't decide this for you. What do you want to do? Harry thought about it, really thought. The way she'd taught him to weigh things that mattered rather than simply reacting to the size of the fear in the moment, and felt, underneath the nerves, something steadier and older settling into place. I want to go, he said. Not because she's daring me to. Because if we don't end this now on our terms, she just tries again later, somewhere we haven't prepared for. I'd rather meet her where we've had time to think it through. Then we go, Diana said, and something fierce and proud moved behind her eyes. Together, all of it exactly the way we've trained for. I'm coming too, Hermione said instantly. Obviously, Ron added, in a tone that suggested the alternative had never once occurred to him. Dumbledore studied the three of them for a long moment, and then, surprisingly, nodded. I will accompany you as well, if you'll permit it, he said. Not to fight your battle for you, Harry. I suspect, from everything I've observed this year, that this particular battle belongs to you and your mother in a way an old wizard's spells could never properly serve. But I have some small experience with Cersei's kind of cunning, and I would rather stand nearby with something useful to offer than remain here uselessly hoping for the best. They apparated as close to the village as the ancient wards around the standing stones allowed, Diana simply carrying Harry the last stretch at a pace that had Ron and Hermione jogging to keep up. Dumbledore striding along beside them with his wand loose in one hand, and an expression of grave, focused calm, and arrived, as the sun sank low and orange behind a scatter of ancient gray stones arranged in a rough circle atop a bare hill, to find Cersei already waiting, seated with unhurried composure on a fallen slab of rock in the center of the ring. You brought quite a party, Cersei said, rising, brushing invisible dust from robes that shimmered faintly, like oil on dark water. How very Gryffindor of you. I confess I expected you to come alone, little demigod, proving yourself brave enough not to need company. I suppose I underestimated how much you've come to depend on being liked. I don't need anyone here to fight for me, Harry said. They came because they wanted to, and because I'm not ashamed to have people who care about me watching what I do. Big difference. Is it? Cersei murmured, unconvinced, and then her eyes moved past him to Diana, and something in her whole bearing shifted, sharpened. 2,000 years of grievance suddenly given a face to aim it at directly. Diana, it has been rather a long time. You look well. Motherhood suits you, I suppose, even the belated, imperfect version you've managed. Cersei, Diana said, and there was nothing warm in it at all, just a level, unhurried readiness that Harry recognized from every sparring match on the Welsh beach. I have spent 2,000 years hoping you'd simply given up. I see now I should have known better. I never give up, Cersei said. Giving up would mean admitting the world's judgment of me was correct, and I have never once believed that, not for a single day since your precious island cast me out for the crime of wanting power they weren't willing to hand me freely. She spread her hands, taking in the circle of stones, the darkening sky, the small gathered audience of children and one very old wizard. So here we are. I promised you all a vindication, and I intend to deliver one way or another. The only real question left is what shape it takes. State your terms, Diana said. Plainly, I have no patience left for riddles tonight. Very well, Cersei's smile sharpened. A duel. You and I, exactly as it should have happened 3,000 years ago. Before your island decided I was too dangerous to be allowed a fair contest. If I win, I take something from your son, not his life. I have no interest in killing him. Dead boys make poor vindications, but a measure of his power, siphoned and bound into something I can carry and study, and eventually used to prove to every scholar and god who ever mocked me that Themyscira's blood was never as pure or protected as they claimed. If you win, she paused, and something almost genuine flickered behind the theatrical malice, an old, tired honesty surfacing despite herself. Then I suppose I finally, properly stop. No more letters, no more shadows in your son's corridors. I have been at this a very long time, Diana. Perhaps it is time one of us actually settles it instead of circling forever. And if I refuse the duel, Diana asked, then I take what I want from the boy anyway, by whatever means prove necessary, and you spend the rest of your considerable life wondering whether refusing was cowardice dressed up as caution. Cersei shrugged, elegant and merciless. I would rather win honestly. But I have never needed to. Diana looked at Harry, a long, searching look, asking a question she didn't say out loud, and Harry, understanding it anyway, gave the smallest possible nod. Do it, he said quietly. I trust you, and even if she doesn't play fair, which she won't, I'm not standing here doing nothing while it happens. Diana turned back to Cersei. Terms accepted, but she doesn't fight alone in this either. If your fight with me is meant to settle something between us honestly, it happens honestly, no third parties, no interference from either side beyond the two of us. Anyone breaks that, the whole agreement is void, and I will treat it as the ambush it would obviously be. Agreed, Cersei said, and something in her tone suggested she'd expected exactly this condition and had already planned around it. Shall we begin, then? I find myself impatient after 2,000 years of waiting. They fought in the center of the stone circle, and it was nothing at all like the battles Harry had half imagined in the tense hours leading up to it. No grand spells, no blinding flashes of colored light. Cersei moved like poured water, robes flowing strangely around limbs that bent at angles just slightly wrong for a human body. And Diana met her with the same brutal, economical precision she'd used to train Harry all summer. Each strike aimed with total certainty, rather than raw power alone. The first exchange lasted less than 5 seconds, Cersei's hand lashing out trailing threads of dark, oily magic that Diana simply refused to be where they landed, sidestepping with the unhurried ease of someone who had studied this exact opponent's habits for centuries even from a distance, and answering with a strike of her own that Cersei barely deflected, staggering back a full step with visible surprise. You've been practicing, Cersei observed, straightening, something like respect creeping into her voice despite herself. I've had 3,000 years to get better at things, Diana said. You've had 2,000 of them nursing a grudge instead of sharpening your actual skill. It shows. Cersei's face tightened, and the fight that followed lost whatever measured quality the opening exchange had carried, becoming something faster, uglier, both women trading blows and spell work with a ferocity that had Ron gripping Hermione's arm hard enough to bruise and Dumbledore's wand rising instinctively before he forced it back down, honoring the terms he'd promised to respect even as every instinct screamed to intervene. Cersei conjured serpents from the shadows between the standing stones, real enough to bite, dozens of them, boiling up out of the ground in a hissing wave, and Diana simply waded through them, letting them strike uselessly against skin and armor that no ordinary poison could touch, closing the distance and driving a fist into Cersei's ribs with enough force to crack stone behind her. Cersei recovered fast, too fast, twisting the pain into fuel, and lashed out with a spell that Harry felt rather than saw, a wave of pressure that struck Diana square in the chest and sent her skidding backward across the grass, gouging furrows in the earth with her heels before she caught her footing. "There it is," Cersei breathed, straightening, something wild and delighted in her face now. "There's the fear I've been waiting to see. Not for yourself, Diana, you've never once feared for yourself, that's always been the maddening thing about you, but for him." Her eyes cut sharp and knowing to Harry. "That's the crack, isn't it? Not that you can't win. That winning has stopped being the only thing you care about the moment you finally became a mother." "You're wrong," Diana said, rising, blood at the corner of her mouth that she wiped away without ceremony. "That's not a crack. That's the whole point of everything you never understood about us. You call it weakness because you spent your whole existence believing love and power were opposites and had to choose one over the other. We never did. That's not our flaw, Cersei. That's the thing you were always missing." Something in Cersei's face flickered, old, buried, genuinely wounded, and for just a moment, watching her, Harry felt something unexpected. Pity, cold and clear, for a woman who had spent 2,000 years so certain love was a cage that she'd built her entire life around proving it, and had somehow never once considered that she might simply be wrong. Then Cersei's expression hardened again, and she drove forward with renewed, furious speed, and the fight resumed with a viciousness that made the ground itself shudder under repeated impacts. It was nearly 10 minutes in, both women bruised, breathing hard, neither having yet found the decisive edge, when the smoke came pouring across the hillside from the ruined manor house visible below in the last gray light of dusk, gathering itself into a familiar, half-formed shape at the edge of the stone circle. "Cersei," Voldemort's thin, hissing voice said, the shape of him barely holding together, weaker even than the last time Harry had seen him flee Quirrell's dying body. "I require your aid. My vessel is gone, my strength fails with every passing day, and you promised me in exchange for the boy's blood a body that would. I am rather busy," Cersei snapped, not even turning fully from her fight with Diana, driving in with another strike that Diana barely deflected. "Come back when I am not in the middle of settling a debt 3,000 years overdue." "You promised," Voldemort's spirit hissed, closer now, and something in his desperation had curdled into an ugly, dawning realization. "You have been using me. All this time, the letters, the guidance, the careful information about the stone, you never intended to help me at all, did you? You simply wanted a tool clumsy enough to make the mistakes that would draw the boy's attention toward you." "Clever, for a corpse," Cersei said, distracted, parrying another of Diana's blows. "Then I owe you nothing further," Voldemort's spirit said, and something in the thin, hissing voice had gone cold and precise in a way that made Harry's skin crawl worse than the shouting ever had. "And I find, dying by inches as I am, that I would rather spend what remains of my strength making certain you fail as thoroughly as I have, than watch you succeed where I could not." He turned, the half-formed, smoke-thin shape of him, toward Harry, and for one horrible second Harry thought the spirit meant to attack directly, but instead Voldemort's ruined voice simply spoke, flat and venomous, and underneath all of it, genuinely spiteful in a way that felt more honest than anything the man had said all year. "She means to bind whatever power she strips from you into an artifact," Voldemort said. "A stone carved from these very ruins, already prepared and hidden beneath the third marker to your left. She intends to complete the ritual the instant your mother's guard slips, regardless of who wins the duel honestly. This contest was never meant to be fair, boy. It was theater, staged for your benefit, while the true working happens elsewhere entirely." Cersei froze mid-strike, and for the first time all night, something like genuine alarm crossed her face. "You treacherous, dying wretch," she snarled, whirling on the smoke shape with a fury that momentarily left Diana an opening she didn't take, watching instead, along with everyone else, the unraveling of an alliance built on two liars each certain they'd outmaneuvered the other. "I have nothing left to lose," Voldemort's spirit said, and there was something almost like satisfaction in the words, the bitter, hollow satisfaction of a man choosing, in his last moments of coherence, to burn down someone else's plan rather than simply fade quietly. "You made that certain the moment you decided I was no longer useful. Consider this my payment in kind." He dissolved then, not fled this time, but genuinely unraveled, the last of whatever coherent will had held the smoke together finally exhausting itself entirely, scattering into nothing on the evening wind. And Harry understood, with a strange, complicated pang of feeling he didn't have time to fully process, that Lord Voldemort, the man who had killed his mother, hunted him all year, offered him partnership in the Mirror Chamber, had just spent his last conscious act on something almost distantly like decency, purely out of spite for a woman who had used him just as thoroughly as he'd meant to use everyone else. Cersei's composure had cracked properly now, and Diana, moving fast, taking full advantage of the distraction without a shred of guilt, terms of the duel already violated by Cersei's own hidden ritual, closed the distance and drove a strike into her that sent her crashing bodily into one of the standing stones hard enough to crack the ancient rock straight through. "The third marker," Diana said, sharp, not looking away from Cersei even as she called it. "Harry." "Got it," Harry said, already moving. He reached the third standing stone in 3 strides, dropped to his knees, and tore at the turf beneath it with both hands, ripping earth and root away until his fingers closed on something small, cold, and carved. A shard of dark stone, etched with symbols that made the cold hum at the back of his skull flare into something close to genuine pain the moment he touched it. A ritual object built specifically, he understood instantly, to hungrily latch onto exactly the kind of power running in his blood. He didn't think about what breaking it might cost him. He simply closed his fist and crushed it. The shard shattered with a sound like a scream, a wave of released magic knocking Harry flat onto his back, and sending a ripple of visible force outward across the hilltop that staggered even Diana and Cersei both, mid-fight, and extinguished half the torches Hermione had lit earlier along the perimeter. Cersei, recovering her footing amid the ruin of the crumbled stone marker, stared at the empty patch of earth where her carefully prepared ritual object had lain, and something in her face, for the first time all night, looked genuinely, completely lost. "You destroyed it," she said, disbelieving. 2 years of preparation, gone, because a child simply crushed it with his bare hand, without even understanding what it was. "Didn't need to understand it," Harry said, climbing back to his feet, breathing hard but steady. "Just needed to know it was yours, and that meant it was a problem." Cersei looked between the ruined marker and Diana, standing steady and unbowed a dozen feet away, and something in her began, visibly, to fracture, not physically, but the whole careful, patient architecture of 2,000 years of planning collapsing at once, all of it contingent on a working that a single crushed stone had just unmade entirely. "This was supposed to matter," she said, and her voice had gone thin, almost plaintive, stripped for one unguarded moment of all its theatrical menace. "This was supposed to finally prove something, that your perfect island's ideals were hollow, that love and duty were a lie you told yourselves to feel superior to women like me who admitted, honestly, what they wanted." "Maybe," Diana said, quiet now, no triumph in it at all, just a tired, weary sadness that Harry hadn't expected to hear in his mother's voice. "You spent 2,000 years trying to prove something that was never actually true, Cersei. Maybe that's the real tragedy here. Not that we exiled you unfairly, all those centuries ago. I won't pretend to know every detail of what happened between you and the Themyscira before I was even born, but that you took one grievance, however real it might have been, and let it consume every single choice you made afterward, until there was nothing left of you but the grievance itself. Cersei stared at her for a long, silent moment, robes torn, stone cracked at her back, the ritual that had anchored her entire plan crushed to fragments on the grass, and something in her face, old, tired, genuinely uncertain for perhaps the first time in centuries, flickered like a candle catching wind. "Perhaps," she said finally, very quietly, then gathering herself, the mask sliding back into place with visible effort. "Or perhaps I simply lost tonight and will spend considerably less time philosophizing about it than you'd like, and considerably more time planning how to do better next time." "There won't be a next time," Harry said, stepping up beside his mother, chin level, voice steady. "Not like this. You wanted to prove something about her by breaking something in me. It didn't work. I'm not broken. I'm not even shaken, not really. A bit rattled, maybe, but that's different. Whatever you do next, you're going to have to find a completely different plan because this one's finished." Cersei looked at him for a long moment, really looked, the theatrical menace draining away into something more genuinely assessing, and then unexpectedly laughed, a short, surprised bark of sound with real amusement buried somewhere inside the exhaustion. "You really aren't afraid of me," she said. "Not even a little. I confess, boy, that's rather more disarming than any spell I could have thrown at you tonight." "No reason to be," Harry said. "You lost, and even if you hadn't, I've got her." He nodded toward Diana, and them. A glance back toward Ron, Hermione, Dumbledore, all watching with tense, careful readiness. "That's not something you can crush with a stone under a marker." Cersei held his gaze a moment longer, and then, with the unhurried dignity of someone choosing retreat over destruction, stepped backward into the deepening shadow between two standing stones, and simply wasn't there anymore. No flash of light, no dramatic exit, just a quiet, patient absence where a woman had stood a moment before. "She'll come back," Diana said into the silence that followed, low enough that only Harry caught it clearly. "Not soon, not the same way, but she will." "I know," Harry said. "Next time we'll be ready for that too." They walked back down the hill in the last gray light before full dark, Ron chattering with nervous, relieved energy about the fight, Hermione already peppering Dumbledore with questions about the exact nature of the ritual stone Harry had destroyed, and Diana walking close beside Harry, quiet, one hand resting on his shoulder in a way that had stopped needing explanation months ago. "You did well tonight," she said, eventually, once the others had drawn slightly ahead, giving them a moment of something like privacy. "Better than well. You made choices under pressure that I've watched grown warriors fail to make. I am proud of you, Harry. I don't think I've said that plainly enough, often enough, this whole year." "You've said it plenty," Harry said, though something warm settled in his chest at hearing it again anyway. "What she said, though, about the crack, about whether I still doubt if my strength's really mine." Diana was quiet a moment, weighing her answer with the same care she gave every choice that mattered. "Do you?" Harry thought about it honestly, the way she'd always insisted he think about hard questions rather than rushing past them. "Less than I did," he said finally. "I think, for a long time at Privet Drive, being strong felt like something that happened to me, not something I actually was. Like borrowed clothes. This year's made it feel more like mine, tonight especially." He paused. "I think she was trying to make me doubt that on purpose, though, same as everything else she said." "She was," Diana agreed. "That is the particular cruelty of someone as old and patient as Cersei. She does not need to break you outright. She only needs to find the one seam where doubt already lives and press on it until it splits wider than it would have on its own. You did not let her tonight. That matters more than I think you fully realize yet." They walked in comfortable silence for a while, the castle's distant lights beginning to glow against the darkening sky ahead of them, and Harry, glancing sideways at his mother, bruised, exhausted, still somehow the most unshakable presence he'd ever known, found himself smiling despite everything the night had cost. "Think Hogwarts is going to let you stick around for summer planning?" he asked. "Given how you basically just fought an ancient sorceress a few miles from school grounds on the last night of term." "Hogwarts," Diana said, dry and amused, "is going to have to get considerably more comfortable with the idea that my son's safety takes precedence over its usual quiet. I imagine Professor Dumbledore already suspects as much." "Reckon he does," Harry agreed, grinning now. "For what it's worth, I'm glad you stayed, all of it, not just tonight." "So am I," Diana said, and the warmth in her voice needed no further explanation at all. The end-of-year feast, held the following evening in a great hall draped in Gryffindor red after Dumbledore's dramatic last-minute point recalculation, handed the house cup to Gryffindor by the narrowest of margins. A recalculation that credited Ron's chess sacrifice, Hermione's logic, and Harry's decision not to abandon a troll-endangered classmate months earlier, each contributing points that had somehow gone unrecorded until exactly the moment they'd matter most. Passed in a haze of noise and celebration that Harry, exhausted from the night before, found himself enjoying more than he'd expected to. Draco Malfoy, catching him near the doors afterward as the students filed out toward the train, looked at him with an expression that had shifted, somewhere over the year, from sneering superiority into something more grudging and complicated. "Heard you fought something up on that hill last night," Draco said. "My father mentioned it. Word travels fast in families like mine. Didn't believe it, honestly. Figured it was exaggerated." "Wasn't exaggerated," Harry said. "No," Draco said, studying him a moment longer, something almost respectful flickering behind the usual cold reserve. "Don't suppose it was." He hesitated, then awkwardly offered something that sounded almost like a genuine truce. "You're not what I expected, Potter. Figured you'd be soft, given all the fuss people made about you before we even got here. You're not soft. Doesn't mean I like you, but I'll give you that much." "Fair enough," Harry said, and meant it, watching the boy walk off toward his father with something like cautious optimism about what a few more years might do to soften that particular grudge. On the train home, squeezed into a compartment with Ron and Hermione, Harry found himself turning the whole year over in his mind. The cupboard, the boulder on the beach, the troll, the mirror, Quirrell's ruined face, Cersei's cold, patient malice on a windswept hilltop, and feeling underneath the exhaustion something steady and certain settling into place. "Same time next year?" Ron asked, grinning as the train pulled into King's Cross. "Wouldn't miss it," Harry said. Diana was waiting on the platform when they disembarked, standing apart from the crowd the way she always did, tall and unmistakable even among a sea of witches and wizards, and the moment she caught sight of him, her whole face lit with something fierce and unguarded that had nothing careful about it at all. Harry crossed the platform at a run, and she caught him in an embrace that lifted him briefly off his feet, laughing despite everything the last 2 days had cost them both. "Ready to go home?" she asked. "Yeah," Harry said, and found, saying it, that the word carried a weight and warmth it had never once carried at Privet Drive. "Yeah, I am." Behind them, far beyond the platform, beyond the ordinary world entirely, a woman who had waited 2,000 years for a single crack in Themyscira's armor sat alone in a room of black marble, staring at a mirror gone dark, already patient as ever, undefeated in her own certainty despite tonight's failure, beginning to plan the next chapter of a war that had not, whatever the boy believed, come anywhere close to its true ending. But that was a story for another year. Tonight, Harry Potter walked out through the barrier at King's Cross Station with his mother's hand resting warm on his shoulder, unafraid of anything the world still had left to throw at him, and for the first time in his life, entirely, completely certain of exactly who he was.